Courtney, can you get the splash screen back up, please?
Good morning, everyone. Wait for a moment for my fellow board members to gather here. Good morning. I'm Joaquin Esquivel, Chair of the State Water Board. Today is April 20th, Tuesday, April 20th. It is 9 a.m. and I would like to call this meeting to order. I'll begin by introducing my fellow board colleagues here. Joining me today is Vice Chair Doreen Diadamo, Board Member Tam Doduck, Board Member Sean McGuire, and Board Member Laurel Firestone. Also with us is our Executive Director, Eileen Sobek, our Chief Counsel, Michael Loffer, our two Chief Deputies, Eric Oppenheimer and Jonathan Bishop. Janine Townsend is our Clerk of the Board, and assisting her today are Margie Argel and Courtney Tyler. As you can see, this meeting is being webcast in order to comply with distancing requirements because of the COVID pandemic. And as authorized in the governor's executive orders, we are just here in this virtual platform. We don't have a physical meeting room today, and public comments are being taken on this platform. So you're actually viewing us one of two ways. You're on YouTube or a customary stream on Cali, PA. If you are intending to comment on any of our items today, you need to be here on this platform, and instructions to do so are at the top of today's agenda. But if you're having challenges with that, you can email commentletters@waterboards.ca.gov and someone can help assist you. With that, I think we're ready to move into our meeting here. And before we get to public forum on today's agenda, we actually have a presentation of a Superior Accomplishment Award, and would like to welcome up Karen Mogus in order to introduce the recipient. And again, just want to acknowledge that and appreciate that we do this. Call up to attention real leadership and work that's going on at the board on some of our more challenging issues. So I'm glad to take the time here to have some acknowledgement. Good morning, Karen.
Great. Thank you, Chair Esquivel. I'm Karen Mogus. I'm Deputy Director of the Division of Water Quality here at the State Water Board. And today I get to, I am super pleased to be able to present a Superior Accomplishment Award to Emily Houlihan. I see Emily on the screen. You can wave, Emily, if you'd like. She's an engineering geologist in the Groundwater Ambient Monitoring and Assessment, or the GAMMA program here in DWQ. And she led the effort to develop the aquifer risk map that the Division of Drinking Water and Division of Financial Assistance will be using to prioritize allocation of the Safe and Affordable Fund for Equity and Resilience, also known as the SAFER program. The Aquifer Risk Map is an online tool, an online interactive tool that's the first publicly available resource depicting potential risk for domestic well users and state small water systems to encounter groundwater above regulatory drinking water standards. The map development required Emily to tackle numerous technical issues, including spatial analysis of limited data sets, groundwater well construction, data quality, lack of data from domestic wells, among other challenges. Emily faced these challenges professionally and calmly, and with superior technical expertise, producing stellar results that I'm sure all of you have had a chance to look at. And I do want to mention that a recent article in the Sacramento Bee also touted the utility of the map, quoting Emily in the article, for addressing the critical drinking water needs across the state. So I am super proud to have Emily as part of the DWQ team. She is an up and comer, and I look forward to seeing what more she can do. And so please join me in congratulating Emily on her superior accomplishments. And here's the point at which we're all supposed to clap and get up and have a photo opportunity with all of the board members. We'll just have to rely on somebody to take a screenshot, I think. So yeah, thank you so much.
Let me take a screenshot now, and we should unmute. Everyone should unmute, and let's go ahead and actually, make some noise for Emily. So thank you. That's no small. Yeah, thank you, Karen. I was going to say that's no small project, and it's a incredibly important day to even acknowledge Emily in this, because we are going to be going over our needs analysis and assessment. And I know that Gamma tool was a really critical part, and to your point, serves many functions, not just for the SAFER program, but ultimately for communities themselves to better understand, quantify, and address the risks to their communities. So Emily, just, incredibly, just thank you. Do you have something to say? Anything particularly helpful for us to understand as you developed your work on the Gamma risk map, and any thoughts about where the next iterations of it go, or just any thoughts generally, by all means. Oh, you're still on mute here. Hold on. Let's ask you to unmute. You should be able to now. There you are.
Oh, sorry. Not too much to say, just it was a great opportunity to be able to work on this and a really rewarding project to see it come to fruition. And I am super excited to see how it gets used and to help people achieve clean drinking water. So thank you very much.
Just thank you. We here at the board are fortunate certainly to work on these issues, but it's you, Emily, and everyone in the programs that are actually leading this work and ensuring that it gets done day to day. And so just incredible thanks for your leadership and really technical work and expertise on a tool that will only continue to be used and grow further. So thank you. And thank you so much, Karen. Really appreciate this opportunity to acknowledge Emily and her work. Thank you. And at some point these will be less awkward because we'll be in person again, and there'll be less of a little more warmth and not just this sort of digital thanks. But again, really appreciate the acknowledgement. Okay, I think with that then we can move to public forum, and I believe we have a handful of speakers. And here at the top, I really want to make sure that I know a couple of folks are coming in it seems to speak perhaps on salmon issues. We do have the Sacramento River Temperature Management Workshop, which is tomorrow. So to the extent that any of our speakers were looking to reflect on the challenges there, would ask that be kept for tomorrow's conversation. But to the extent that there are other more general items being wished to address in public forum, that's around salmon and salmon issues, that's fine. I just wanted to make sure and flag that at the start here. I believe first we have Mary Kate Lowry.
And Ms. Lowry was one of those who'd indicated she was speaking on salmon, and it appears that she has not joined the Zoom this morning, so she's probably going to join us tomorrow.
Okay, thank you. And then so we have Robert Young then.
And my regrets, I believe Mr. Young is actually here for the urban water conservation item.
Oh, okay.
The next speaker should be Regina Chichizola. And Regina, you'll be given an opportunity to unmute momentarily.
Hello, thank you.
Hello, good to see you again.
Okay, you can hear me?
Yes, we can.
All right.
Good morning.
My name is Regina Chichizola, and I'm here today with Save California Salmon. And I also work with the Pacific Coast Federation of Fishermen's Associations. And I will be speaking tomorrow, but today I wanted to speak on the Scott and Shasta rivers. The reason I'm calling is, as you know, the Klamath River is in a crisis situation this year. We are looking at juvenile fish kills already happening on the river due to the C. Shasta disease. And there's just not a lot of water to go around. And I feel like it's critical that this board does everything that it can to protect the Trinity Rivers carryover storage and the Scott and Shasta rivers. You do have TMDLs for the Scott and Shasta rivers, but despite the fact that there are changes being made to water rights in order to protect salmon in a lot of the rivers in California this year, the farmers are not doing anything to conserve water. They've actually watered outside of normal irrigation season. The flows are extremely low. In many years in the Scott and Shasta rivers, there's very large coho fish kills due to water diversions. There's also responsibility of this board to protect the public trust through not allowing the Scott River to be dewatered through groundwater diversions within the zone with the Scott, where there's water that plays between the groundwater and surface water. So I'm asking this board to do anything in order to make sure that there's some water within those rivers this year to stop fish kills. It is critical. We're actually facing the end of an endangered species within those river systems. I mean, coho salmon really rely on those river systems. Tribes rely on the salmon that come from there for their food sources. And it's something that this board can do, at least curtail junior water rights and groundwater pumping within the zone where the public needs to be protected. So those are my comments. Also, I would really ask the board to look at issues such as over diversions, TMDL compliance, and water masters within those areas. So please do what you can within your authority to stop coho fish kills and Chinook fish kills within the Scott and Shasta River this year. And also please think about what you can do within your authority to protect carryover storage and water rights with it, for the river within the Trinity River system. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Chichizola. I really appreciate you coming to the board today and addressing us and making sure to flag these conditions. I know staff are working in those watersheds, are aware, have been, as you know, I think for years, but certainly the drought conditions that we find ourselves with now really heighten ultimately the challenges that we've been facing in our watersheds for a while. So just thank you. I appreciate you coming before the board this morning. Next, we have Dave Webb.
Hello, my name is David Webb. I'm representing the Friends of the Shasta River. And I had intended to speak briefly to the Delta issues. I've got a meeting conflict tomorrow, but I'll just say that when the water plan was developed, I think it's become quite clear that we didn't have adequate knowledge then to set aside sufficient water to protect fish and wildlife and aquatic systems. And we are now faced with playing catch up on that. And even worse, we didn't really recognize the fact that while we were creating supply, we did nothing to cap demand. And this growing demand is basically undermining and stymieing truly rational, fair, and balanced water distribution. So I'll leave it at that for the issue for tomorrow, but thank you. And please give some thought to the catch up that somehow needs to happen. The other two issues I wanted to address, first off, is the question of riparian rights. And as probably most of you recall, back in 2014 and 15, you as a board required persons in the Delta area who are claiming riparian rights to provide documentation of the original riparian nature at the time of patent of grounds that were irrigating with riparian water. And that process with modern access to the internet is a fairly doable one, and one that I believe most people are able to comply with in about 30 days. I'd like to ask that you utilize that same process, same concept in the Shasta River, where we too are grappling with the conflicts between appropriative water rights and riparian water rights, and the difficulties faced by those of us trying to work on fisheries restoration and maintaining some semblance of reasonable in-stream flows, the water master who's trying to allocate water under an adjudication dating back to 1932, and riparian users who can and quite legally will simply turn off and on as they see fit, often stymieing efforts to both protect fish with in-stream flows and to provide reasonable and predictable amounts of water to appropriative users managed by the water master. And I think it would take us a big step forwards if you just had the riparian users begin to understand what is legally riparian for them to irrigate and what is not, and move us towards a better understanding and better management of our system under existing laws. The last item I've got is somewhat related. As it currently stands, individuals who divert water from a stream are required to report to you annually their annual statements of water usage. And this has provided us with a very good foundation of information that in the rather distant past simply wasn't available. But in water mastered systems, the water master puts together a very brief and superficial overview of the river, nothing resembling the detail that the individual water users would have to report if they're managing their water right on their own. And as a person working on planning for and working around and needing to document and justify planned changes to water usage, to dedications to in-stream flows. It's really critical to have a good solid basis of information on what the past practice of a given irrigator may have been. And the water master records simply do not provide that. And I would like to ask that the water masters be required to report in at least the same detail as an individual diverter would be required to report. So report by diverter, months of use, quantity of use per month, maximum diversion quantity per month, and if it possible beyond that, to review the sorts of information you're gathering and look and take a forward-looking look at what else should you be asking people to track and report so that we can move towards returning better balance to our water management system. And thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Webb, for your good comments this morning. Well received. And yes, basic information like previous year's diversions reported into the water rights system is a fundamental basis of water rights administration. And we need to do better around that and to continue to modernize our approaches. So I just thank you. I appreciate your comments this morning. And that's concludes public forum at this time. So thank you for folks that have taken the time to address the board this morning. So a quick sort of scheduling matter here. So it looks like we don't have any public commenters on item number 3. We can still take it up and have a staff presentation, or we can tuck it into our uncontested items with item number 2 at this point. And just a brief note on today's agenda, we purposefully really stacked, if you will, these informational items to have a real deep dive and discussion regarding drinking water and drought, but drinking water generally, and really then diving into drought. I think if you recall during our board meeting around water rights and drought, we had flagged that this is something that we were going to need to explore as well, the aspects of drought and drinking water, and is why the agenda is stacked the way it is. And with here having Central Coast Region item number 3 before it. So I'm just kind of looking to my fellow board members. If we would like, we could again take them all up take up the uncontested and then take up and vote number 3, I believe. Or we can actually just have a staff presentation on number 3, and I'm open to either one. And first, actually need to go to board business and adopt our board meeting minutes. So we'll do that, and then once we've done that, we can decide then where we go on 2 and 3. How's that?
I'll move adoption of the board minutes.
Do we have a second?
I'll second.
Ms. Townsend, can you please call a roll call vote?
Yes. Vice Chair Diadamo.
Aye.
Board Member Sean McGuire.
Aye.
Board Member Firestone.
Aye.
Board Member Dodek.
Aye.
And Chair Esquivel.
Aye.
Thank you.
Thank you. The vote carries. Board meeting minutes from the April 6-7 board meeting are adopted. Now, we have uncontested item number 2, and it is still uncontested. We don't have any commenters. We also don't have any commenters on item number 3. So open to how folks may feel, but it may be worth getting to our drinking water discussion.
I would like to get to the drinking water discussion, but that's not to minimize all the wonderful work that went into items 2 and 3. Many thanks to the staff and the stakeholder and the regional water boards for working on these important matters. And with that, I'll move for adoption of items 2 and 3.
Thank you, board member. Do we have a second?
I'll second.
Thank you. And Ms. Townsend, can you please call a roll call vote?
Yes. Board Member Dodek.
Aye.
Board Member McGuire.
Aye.
Board Member Firestone.
Aye.
Vice Chair Diadamo.
Aye.
Chair Esquivel.
Aye.
Thank you.
Thank you as well. And items number 2 and 3 are passed. And again, to board member Dodek's point, just thank everyone for, I know the good work that goes into all of the items that come before us, but just thank you. That then brings us to item number 4. which will be an update on monthly water production and conservation data reported by urban retail water suppliers. So as you all may recall, in the last drought, we were having monthly updates on urban conservation. As we transitioned into wetter years there, they were replaced with many other things that were needed on the calendar. But with dry conditions and drought here in front of us, we all thought it would be very important to start to bring these back to be able to see where we are on conservation as a state, and even explore what I'm sure are regional differences. So I want to thank folks in the program for pulling up this item, and welcome them to begin it.
Thank you. I was unable to unmute for whatever reason. Sorry about that.
No, it's okay. Sorry, but I saw you raise your hand. It was like, oh, she hasn't been able to unmute. Good to have you with us.
All right. Well, this is a rip-roaring start. Good morning, Chair Esquivel and members of the board. My name is Marielle Pinheiro, and I'm a research data specialist with the Office of Research, Planning, and Performance. I will be providing the Urban Water Conservation Update for the February 2021 dataset. Next slide, please. So just a quick refresher on what this dataset represents. We gather information from 411 water agencies throughout the state, namely urban water suppliers, which are defined in statute as entities that have more than 3,000 service connections or provide more than 3,000 acre-feet of water annually for municipal purposes. These agencies provide water to the vast majority of California's population, and this data set provides a comprehensive monthly snapshot of the state's water use trends. The reporting site was redesigned prior to October 1st of 2020, when a reporting rulemaking adopted by the board in April of 2020 went into effect. The revised site collects basic information about each agency's service area population, monthly production and residential consumption, and other voluntary fields. Since the site redesign, we've also been asking reporters whether their agency is currently experiencing a supply shortage equivalent to 10% or more. Responding yes to this question reveals a supplemental section with additional questions regarding actions taken to address these shortages. Next slide, please. The State Water Board began monthly tracking of water conservation for each of the state's urban water suppliers in the midst of the last drought to impact California. From mid-2014 to the end of 2017, reporting was mandatory and then transitioned to voluntary after the emergency declaration was ended. During the voluntary reporting period, the majority of suppliers continued to provide information, albeit on a slowly declining basis, particularly when operations were impacted by COVID beginning in 2020. The lowest rate of completion was for the August 2020 dataset, with 84.5% of reporters providing the numbers. Reporting became mandatory again in October of 2020, and Water Board staff have been working to bring report completion back up to 100%. As of the beginning of April, the report completion rate for the February 2021 dataset is slightly below 90%. Next slide, please. Despite the fact that the reporting is now mandatory, the report completion rate is still below 100%, as seen in the previous slide. So staff have undertaken a variety of strategies to get to full reporting, such as sending reminders via the conservation listserv and following up with delinquent agencies via email and phone. We've granted 30-day extensions to 10 agencies so far in order to provide sufficient time to complete the reporting backlog. Next slide, please. As the water supply in California is very heavily influenced by the amount of rain received during the winter and early spring, the relative dryness of this time period has implications for the later months when there is much less precipitation. This chart shows state monthly average precipitation totals from the 2012-2013 water year to the present, with the bars representing the rainfall totals and the colors representing the anomaly relative to the 1981 to 2010 monthly mean. Note that even during the drought years, there can be months with above average rainfall. However, these months are not enough to make up for shortfalls the rest of the year. Other water years, like 2017, are extremely wet overall. The current water year continues the ongoing hot and dry trend experienced in the previous year. Next slide, please. The broader climate trends seen in the previous slide are reflected in statewide consumption patterns. Water use generally goes up in the drier years and down in the wetter years, with the exception of the years when the mandatory restrictions were in place. Note that we have not seen a return to pre-drought levels of water use in the more recent dry years of 2018 and 2020. Next slide, please. This chart shows estimated statewide urban potable water production over the past few years. The February 2021 total, which is the end of that black line, is estimated to be about 107 billion gallons for the 411 urban water suppliers reporting. Thus far, 2021 total production is in line with values from 2015, 2018, and 2020, all dry years as previously noted. Next slide, please. Per capita residential use for February 2021 is also in line with recent dry years, with a statewide average RGPCD of 70 daily per capita gallons. Next slide, please. And finally, some updates on legislation related to water conservation. SB 606 and AB 1668 reflect the dedicated work of many water suppliers, environmental organizations, and members of the legislature. SB 606 and AB 1668 emphasize efficiency and stretching existing water supplies in our cities and on farms. Efficient water use is the most cost-effective way to achieve long-term conservation goals, as well as provide the water supply reliability needed to adapt to the longer and more intense droughts that climate change is causing in California. In carrying out SB 606 AB 1668, State Water Board staff continue to coordinate with the Department of Water Resources. This Thursday, April 22nd, from 10 to 12, Department and State Water Board staff will present on the findings of the indoor residential water use study. The indoor residential water use standard is just one piece of this new framework. By October of this year, the department is required to provide its recommendations on other pieces, such as the standard for outdoor residential water use, for commercial, industrial, and institutional outdoor irrigation of landscape areas with dedicated irrigation meters, and appropriate variances for unique uses that can have material effect on an agency's water use. AB 1668 and SB 606 directed the State Water Board to adopt the regulation implementing this new framework by June 30th, 2020. Our economic and environmental impact analyses are underway, and we hope to initiate the rulemaking later this year. AB 1668 and SB 606 are also required urban water suppliers to conduct annual supply and demand assessments. DWR has been telling suppliers that the first annual water supply and demand assessment reports will be due on July 1st of 2022. Urban retail water suppliers will begin calculating objectives in 2024. And with that, I am done with the update, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you so much, Ms. Pinheiro, and sorry for the technical glitch here at the start. I don't have any questions other than, the statistic that I know I think we've been providing is that, from that prior moment from the last drought, we're statewide, still conserving somewhere around 16% of at least, pegged to 2013, I know is our baseline when we sort of talk about prior to the last drought and the levels of use. Is that the correct number? Or how would we, want to characterize, I guess, the amount of conservation that is held from the last drought? Oh, you have to raise your hand again. Sorry. You should be able to unmute now.
I don't know why this keeps happening.
Sorry about that.
I'm sorry, could you repeat the question?
Yes, when we have been providing a statistic, I believe that it's we've been conserving still about 16% on average, if you will, statewide, compared to water usage, urban water usage at least, prior to this last drought that we had. Is that still the case? Is it?
That is still the case, yes.
It's 16%. And then, okay, great. Thank you. Yeah, that's helpful. Board members, any other questions? Vice Chair.
It just strikes me that as we transition into efficiency with sort of a different approach, looking at an overall budget and really more regionally focused, that there's perhaps a way to connect the dots between what we used to do in terms of, you know, the statewide and the role that we undertook during the last drought, versus the new direction that we're heading in, you know, lessons learned from the last round, that there may be an opportunity as we receive these reports to be updated on what's going on regionally. In other words, pulling out some specific information. And I don't want to turn this into a huge exercise for staff, because I know that they're very much focused. The same people that are working on these reports are working on development of water loss and other issues. But I think that it would be helpful for us to receive information about what's going on in certain regions, areas where they're really pressing and being very aggressive on water use reductions, and then also where they've instituted their own drought management plans and mandatory conservation. It'd be helpful for us to receive that information, as well as to help with messaging during this critical time. So that would be my request for future reports.
Yeah, I completely agree and support that, Vice Chair, that, you know, in future reports, as we, you know, these start up here and we start to, you know, get a little bit more of a pace on them, certainly, but then also a deeper dive, to your point, on the sort of regional aspects that we see. I know Marin, there was an announcement recently about mandatory conservation or cuts there. And so again, I think, you know, understand, knowing that droughts do unfold regionally in very different ways. We saw that in the last drought, thinking particularly of Santa Barbara, but we know that, you know, there are places like the Russian River already that, you know, we're flagging as places of particular interest. And so it would be helpful to maybe have some conservation focused sort of data sometimes by those watersheds as well. So I support that completely.
If I might add, I also very, very strongly supported that. I also read about Marin and the action they're taking there on their own to try to lower water use. And I think the more we can do to highlight these kind of innovative, you know, actions by the water agencies themselves, just to point out not only what can be done, but also, you know, the good examples of what should be done. I think, you know, people tend to think about conservation from the last drought as being these statewide regulatory mandates issued by us. And while that has its uses and purposes, if there is any possibility for agencies to, on their own, based on their local needs, based on their local tools and resources, to instigate, initiate actions on their own, I think we should highlight it and encourage it. So yes, kudos to Marin, and hopefully others will also examine their set of circumstances and decide, you know, what actions they need to take.
Thank you so much, board member. Yeah, very critical point, I think, is that drought management is at the local level best implemented, insofar as the sort of leadership, the calls, the disparate decision making that goes on during drought. You need local leaders to be standing up and assessing local conditions, and the state is here to support as well. You know, we've been talking about drought in the press with our, you know, both our letter to water rights holders, but then also today's discussion for a bit here. And so thank you. I think it is important to make sure and lift up that critical local leadership that helps better assess local conditions with the help of technical tools that the board is here with DWR and other state partners to help provide to that decision making. But it's a good thing to see, and it's, I agree with you, to be encouraged.
Chair Esquivel, and then I would just add, where appropriate, calling out areas where perhaps they are having challenges with water use reduction and have overall higher water use numbers. I know, of course, there's reasons for that depending on climate and lot size, et cetera. But I also felt in the last drought that it was helpful to have that information out, sort of the good actors and the bad actors, and, you know, overall, you know, moving in the direction of reduction.
I wanted to add something, if I can, that,
of course.
you know, I noticed here in the urban water space that, you know, we're still working on trying to get to 100% reporting, but even as it dips down, it's still at about 90%. And in other spaces, like water rights, we have just really extremely poor reporting rates. And I think just highlighting here how powerful it is to, and what an important tool it is to understand water use and how that changes and sort of overall how we're doing in the state to both inform and enable us to do our job, but also to you know, help reflect on how different regions are doing and how we're understanding the challenges that we're facing. And so I just wanted to underscore, you know, again, the power of this kind of data, the necessity of it, and appreciate we're still working to get 100%, but also overall, in the scheme of things, I think fairly high, and appreciate the power that is and the importance within certainly our ability to do our work of reporting.
Thank you, board member. Very good points.
Can I make just a couple comments? I think that, you know, our hope and intent is as we move into the summer season now, and given the dry, you know, really dry conditions that we find ourselves in, is that we present these conservation updates more frequently, like we did during the drought in 2015 and 16. And we can definitely present results, certainly by hydrologic region, to get a little bit more granularity. And then also we can, as you've requested today, pull out sort of showcased either watersheds or water suppliers where conditions are either extraordinarily dry or they're taking extraordinary efforts in those regions or in those districts. And I think that's what you're looking for, but I definitely want to confirm. And to board member Firestone's point, yeah, you know, I've always thought that compliance with with the water supply reporting has been really high, much better than we see in water rights, for example, or in other areas. I think part of it is it's, you know, a smaller universe of suppliers or of reporters. We're only talking about, you know, 400 instead of 40,000 plus. Also, they tend to be bigger agencies serving, you know, at least 3,000 accounts. They're delivering at least 3,000 acre feet of water per year. So they tend to be more sophisticated. They're also a group that sort of prides themselves on compliance, has been my experience, and really, you know, takes the extra steps necessary to make sure they are compliant. Even though we're not at 100%, you know, we're 90% is pretty darn good. And I think we'll even probably do better as we move into the summer here. And so, yeah, we definitely need to improve on water right reporting. It's something that I think we've talked to you all about, the need and some ideas on how to improve that. Eric Ektal in the Division of Water Rights, Deputy Director there, has a lot of really good ideas. It's going to, I think, take some time to implement, but it will be an area of focus for us. But I think we can certainly come back again more frequently and deliver the type of information that you're requesting.
Thank you, Eric. Really appreciate that. Board Member McGuire.
Yeah, all good comments and completely agree with the direction here. I really look forward to hearing more region-specific reporting out. But I'm also reminded that droughts are slow-moving emergencies. and it's hard to predict, where this is going to go. But we do all have tools now that we can take to save water, individually, and as a state. So while every region is facing their own challenges, and some more so than others, for me, this update is just a good reminder about how we're all in this together on some level. And so, these reports are really helpful, and I would just like us to continue at the Water Board to think about our messaging and to think about how we can get the word out to communities, to folks that maybe don't watch these board meetings, that don't necessarily always get regular updates from us. So we can, do our part to just let folks know that this is the time to really start buckling down to the extent that you can to save water, and every drop helps. And so that's what I'm looking at here going into this summer, just with all the uncertainty that surrounds the situation that we're in. So, I know it's not easy, and I know not everyone can do it, and it's difficult, but we did achieve a lot in the last drought. We did, as a state, really, buckle down, whether it was mandatory requirements or just a community sense that we needed to do more. We did. And so I would hope that we can do that again and reach those goals, whatever those may be. And just suggest that we, thinking through our communications approach here and our outreach is going to be really important here in the coming weeks and months. Thank you.
If I could just respond to that, yeah, that's a great suggestion and something that we've been thinking about, Board Member McGuire. And I do think that we're in a good position to do that with we've gotten some additional senior staffing in our communications office, and our Office of Public Participation is fully staffed and has really been busy and really thoughtful about a communications and outreach plan. So we've been thinking about and working on that kind of messaging as, we've been watching conditions, and certainly as if and as conditions get worse, we'll ramp up those efforts, and we'll make sure to let the board members know kind of what that outreach and communications plan is, so that you can help us amplify it as you go out and speak to other stakeholders as well.
Thank you both. We do have one public comment for this item. We have Mr. Robert DeYoung. I would invite him up now.
Yes, I'm here. I'm here.
Yes, good morning. Thank you for joining us.
Yes, I'm okay. I got to hit this. I'm not okay. Can you see me? Can you hear me?
Yes, we can see and hear you. Good morning.
Yeah, I'm not sure my talk here is appropriate, but is a personal local issue, very local. And you're talking about drops of water. Well, this is pretty much about drops of water. But recently, our homeowners association, for aesthetic reasons, served us as well as other homeowners in our HOA with a maintenance violation requiring us to move almost all of our mulch. And the removal would make our watering much less efficient. So what I'm really asking, is there a water conservation law which would keep our HOA from implementing this water wasting edict? It's really a silly edict. They actually say you cannot have more than 10% mulch on your front yard. Now, it's hard for probably you to believe this is true, but it is true. So now I'm facing a meeting tomorrow, and I'm trying to, how would you say, fight this. Can you help me with some kind of rule?
Thank you, Mr. DeYoung. I appreciate you bringing this up. I, actually recall in the last drought this, being written about a bit, where there was often conflicting sort of messaging and otherwise rules when it came to conservation in the last drought and some of the HOA rules out there. I defer to Mr. Lawfer, our chief counsel here, if there's anything he could point you to that might be helpful to you, but I nothing comes to my mind.
Yeah. Hello, Mr. DeYoung. Unfortunately, there's nothing that the Water Board enforces. During the last drought, what Chair Escobar is referring to is there was a legislative change that did impose, well, it basically voided a number of restrictions that homeowners associations around the state had with respect to maintaining turf and having turf instead of drought tolerance. And it authorized homeowners basically to disregard those types of restrictions that would have limited the use of drought tolerant plants. I'm not aware of anything that would go to that level of specificity covering coverage from mulch and other water conserving techniques. That's an interesting concept, something that, perhaps for a longer term solution. I will say there's another facet of that legislation, and that was when a local agency or the governor declares a drought emergency or a local emergency, and there are watering-based requirements within local homeowners association ordinances or CC&Rs, they are not enforceable during a drought emergency. And so you may want to consult a local attorney. We can't provide legal advice on whether it applies to your specific situation, but the Civil Code section from that 2015 law is Civil Code section 4735. And it may be worth having an attorney who may be able to provide you some advice on that and whether or not there may be an avenue. But the specificity you're identifying, the 10% coverage requirement, I'm not aware of anything in existing law that gets to that level of detail.
I wasn't specifically looking to void the 10%. It's just that this rule requires us to basically waste water. So I wasn't really trying to change the 10%, but the effect of that. And by the way, I am going to talk about Civil Code section 4735. That's in my presentation tomorrow. I am aware of that, and hopefully that carries some water, pardon the pun.
Thank you, Mr. DeYoung. Really appreciate the question and the back and forth here. And I'm glad you were already aware of the water code section. And thank you, as always, to Mr. Lawfer for pulling that out of
okay. Thank you for having me aboard. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Any other discussion from fellow board colleagues, both on Mr. DeYoung's comments and or otherwise our discussion here? Well, great. Thank you. That was a good first conservation update in what will be many. And I appreciate the direction and thought about continuing to make them a little more meaty, if you will, and reflective of the conditions that we're seeing as we go into drought conditions. So thank you, everyone, for the good thoughts and considerations. Next, we'll go ahead and move on to item number 5, which is a presentation on the small water systems and rural communities drought and water shortage contingency planning and risk assessment report. I want to just really thank the Department of Water Resources, Mr. Inohosa here, and his entire team for the really incredible work on this project at DWR and with the board, because ultimately all this data is in our needs assessment, and we'll later go into that in the next item, but felt it was really going to be worthwhile and very useful for all of us to actually have the Department of Water Resources here to co-present and, more importantly, present on their report that is really coming at a well-timed moment, given the dry conditions that we have, given the need we know to better respond to communities, particularly rural communities in disadvantaged areas of the state, who we didn't do as well by in the last drought, along with when it comes to some of our environmental concerns, if we're candid. And so, again, this work comes really well timed, and just thank you for joining us this morning, Mr. Inohosa, and I turn it over to you.
Well, good morning, Chairman Esquivel and board members. As Chairman mentioned, my name is Arthur Inohosa. I'm the Chief of the Division of Regional Assistance with our Department of Water Resources down the street a couple blocks. And I'm here to talk to you today about our small water systems and rural communities drought and water shortage contingency planning and risk assessment report. It's going to be awkward for me to continually say small water systems and rural communities drought and water shortage contingency planning and risk assessment report. So next slide. I'm going to just call it the CDAG report. This was a single report that was divided into 2 with hopes of getting it through the governor's office quicker. It kind of caught up to itself. So when all was said and done, we were back to 1 report, but we didn't want to re-merge. So we still consider it 2 parts. And there was 2 parts to start with anyway. This whole thing comes to us via the water use efficiency legislation, particularly Friedman's bill, Assembly Bill 1668. And we couldn't have done this without help from board members, our county group. hence the name CDAG report. Next slide. So we were told in legislation to do two things. Identify small suppliers. By that we mean folks under the 3,000 connections, under the 3,000 acre-feet limit, and more than 15. And rural communities, which we take to mean self-supplied folks, the folks that aren't part of a system. Maybe they're really small, like 12 or like a small trailer park or something, or and more often than not, individuals with their own well or other supply. And we were to identify their risk of drought and water shortage vulnerability. And then we're also asked to develop recommendations and guidance for improving the drought contingency planning for those two constituents. So we wanted to do this for the legislation with a lot of input. It was required anyway, just the broad scope of who's doing what and who's out there. So we assembled these work groups to help us out. Next slide. So all together, we had this process laid out. We had a 10-member project team with 3 state agencies, the department, the board, and OEHA. We had 32 members representing folks in the CDAG, 6 advisory groups. We broke things down. And then we had the 2 main work groups, which was in the previous slide, working on risk assessment and then working on recommendations. And we also talked with a lot of other folks too, CPC, OES, and OPR to help us out as well. And then there was the Indian Health Services and the US EPA also chimed in to help us out. Next slide. So we started this effort back in 2018, scoping things out and asking folks to join in, help us out. When we proceeded on through the 2018 and then all 2019 with a lot of meetings, a lot of work group sessions. And by the end of 2019, we had pretty much the main document completed. Then it just needed to go through review. And it was a longer process than we had anticipated. The pandemic and other things, of course, didn't help. But finally, we got through the public review. We got a final draft out and approved this last month, as well as the tool went through some refinements throughout this course of period of time. And now it's just, of course, a recommendation to the legislature. But there is already a legislation out there too, at least in the works, that would take most of these recommendations and institute them. I'm not really sure on the progress of SB 552 yet, but I knew it was started. You'll note here I also noted 2 Civic Spark Fellows. The department has 4 Civic Spark Fellows working for it, 2 assigned specifically to our water use efficiency work, and they're helping pilot how we might implement these recommendations. There's one dedicated to working in Tulare County and one dedicated to working in Lake County. And if you're not familiar with the Civic Spark program, it's like an AmeriCorps program here in the state of California with some very dynamic folks helping agencies with all sorts of issues. And we've got some folks that were very interested in water, been very helpful, very dynamic, getting a lot of stuff done. And they're cheap for folks that have to actually figure out a way to pay for this stuff. They're very inexpensive. Contract with the League of Cities. No, wait.
Yeah, I appreciate the flag on the Civic Spark Fellowship. We have a couple of fellows as well, and I know it was a relatively recent program, only a few years old here, I believe, and I completely agree, Art. Just really incredible folks coming out of that program. So thank you.
Yeah, local government commission. I stumbled on that word. Okay, next slide. So let's just jump right in. Recommendations. They're broken into a couple parts. One for small water suppliers, another group of recommendations for the self-supplied communities or rural communities. We thought self-supplied communities was more representative because not everybody is in a rural area that has their own self-supply. And we didn't want, even though the legislation mentions the word rural, the intent was those that are otherwise not covered. And so we used, for our own purposes, self-supply communities because that got a broader spectrum. We also gave some recommendations to tribes and then some general recommendations. So next slide. We have 7 recommendations for small water suppliers. The first 3 are here. The small water suppliers being those with 15 to 200 or 2,999 connections. Develop an emergency response plan and a drought supply evaluation. Pretty straightforward. The legislation pretty much said to do this. And as you were mentioning in the previous segment, the more you plan, the better a chance you have of adapting and accommodating whatever might come your way. So that's first and foremost, get a plan together. Recommendation 2 was for those folks less than 1,000 supply connections, work with the water board's going to work with you to establish a minimum resiliency measures. There's a lot of variation between suppliers, 15 to 2,999. The 2,000 folks can be fairly sophisticated. Maybe not as big as some of the larger urban ones, but they can still usually pull together some resources. But under 1,000, it can be very, very volunteer practically. And so it made sense that they might need a little more help. And so that's what this recommendation gets at, working with the board directly for some resiliency measures. And then for the larger—
Inohosa, I'm sorry, Mr. Inohosa, just really quick, going back up to develop emergency response plans, did you encounter many systems that already had them, or is it really, all of them are needing to develop these, that no one really had much in place? Just kind of wondering.
No, I don't really know.
Okay. Yeah.
If I don't remember,
yeah,
my gut told me there wasn't nearly as many as you would hope.
Right. Right.
Not in terms of a definitive plan to call on that they can, just work through.
Right. It may be something that isn't very usable, that hasn't been dusted off in 5 or 10 years or something, probably, or something. Okay. Thank you.
And then regarding the larger of the small systems, the 1,000 to under 3,000. We're recommending developed an abridged drought and water shortage contingency plan. Not the full plan that you see in an urban water management plan, but along those lines, something a little more sophisticated. The next slide. And then the last 4 recommendations here is that we recommend that the state should support these small water systems with technical assistance on drought and water shortage planning, preparation, and response. And this could be anything from helping them understand what we're talking about to financial assistance so they can pull together the resources to do them themselves or contract out with someone. It might even be us providing direct resources, us being the state, direct resources, or a contractor to help them out. Because some of these systems don't even have the wherewithal to put together an ask, or might not even know how to go about starting it. They don't have the ability to contract out or what have you. So we might just hire contractors and send them to go work for some of these folks. The 5th recommendation is in developing a plan, the systems should use periodic statewide drought and water shortage risk assessments prepared by the state, unless better data is available. So we'll give them a sort of a start, if you will. And then the water systems should provide and maintain accurate water service area boundaries. Where these folks are is the data is not that great. As we're seeing, and even with the larger systems, the urban water management systems with our landscape area measurement work, there's a lot of well, it's changing a lot, especially with the large ones. And there's a lot of inconsistency sometimes too with what's reported. And then
just
finally,
quickly on that point, I think the board is specifically looking to better fix that. Ensure that we're having timely digital formatted information as to the service boundaries for not just drinking water systems, but also wastewater systems in the state. Hoping that we can get some real progress on that here soon, knowing it's been an issue for years. And, I think DWR has whole units dedicated to trying to keep track of some of that because it is so important to all of our work, and it doesn't seem to be yet, as comprehensive as we need. And so we're hoping that we'll change that here soon.
Cool. And then finally here, the state should support additional infrastructure to improve drought and water shortage preparedness and response. In other words, what can we do or help and support to help back them up? Realizing that can be very limited and that's got to be, there's no easy Band-Aid that works, or Band-Aid, there's no easy solution for a lot of these systems. Okay, now next slide. So regarding self-supply communities, 5 recommendations here in total. First one, counties can strengthen drought resilience by completing a county-wide drought and water shortage contingency plan for the rural communities, which they incorporate. Specific drought and as a risk specify drought as a risk in their local hazard mitigation plan, and have an emergency operations plan include response to drought, and drought shortage, water shortage contingency. So every county has to have their emergency response plan, are they all incorporating the needs of these self-supplied communities? The last drought would suggest not. So, how can we help the counties, better prepare? Because as Sean mentioned, Member McGuire mentioned earlier, emergencies can be slow going and developing, and they all start local. As a general rule, we locals roll up to their county OASs and finally to state OASs, who then ask for other assistance. And those counties we need to help those counties be as ready as possible for this particular emergency.
Yeah,
the county or the state should provide technical assistance to help to self-supplied households and improve reliability of their water supply. Which speaks for itself. Next slide.
Yeah, and I would even note there, I believe today, Mendocino County Board of Supervisors is voting on drought proclamation. So that local sort of county leadership that we saw roll out in the last drought, as you said, kind of counties taking the lead around understanding their circumstances and conditions, I think is we're starting to see that certainly in these dry conditions as well. So thank you for that.
Cool. Third recommendation is to incorporate drought resilience and water shortage contingency policies or implementation programs into the safety or other elements of general plans. So that's a I think that kind of speaks for itself too. Are they considering drought? Are they considering some of their water issues in their general plan? I think the bane of water management in the state has always been its tie or lack thereof to land use. So here's a bit of a push to at least be more considerate in terms of the general plan. Recommendation 4, counties or regional planning agencies should use their periodic statewide risk assessment to prioritize needs for drought and water shortage contingency planning. We'll get into the risk assessment in a bit here. And then finally, the state should continue to improve its understanding of domestic well locations and associated well depths. We know where a lot of wells are, but we're sure there's a lot of wells we're unaware of, or at least in terms of what their quality is like, or what their resilience might be. Next slide. Now, tribes, of course, being sovereign nations, we can't recommend anything specific. So these are, what we hope will be taken is good advice. And that tribes are encouraged to develop their own drought and water shortage contingency plans and formally adopt them through a resolution of their tribal council or other tribal authority with jurisdiction. And that the state should coordinate with Indian Health Services when preparing periodic statewide risk assessment to also include tribal water systems. We'll get into the risk assessment. We were limited in what we could pull together, that unless tribes wanted to volunteer a lot of information, we couldn't just pull it or use it easily. But there did seem to be a wish to do so in terms of supporting tribes. And so how we do that, we thought a recommendation was in order to help point that out. And Indian Health Services is in a spot where they can probably do quite a bit of help for us. Next slide. And then some general recommendations, just the 3 here. The state should conduct periodic statewide drought and water shortage risk assessments using the best available statewide information. We've done a risk assessment. I'll get into that momentarily. We hope it doesn't become a one and done. And that's what this is here, to point out that it's the kind of thing that you need to kind of continue to update on some sort of periodic basis. And that drought and water shortage contingency planning and response should be incorporated into implementation of the Safe and Affordable Drinking Water Fund, and to establish a standing interagency drought and water shortage task force to facilitate proactive state planning and coordination. And let's not stop now that we've done a report. Let's keep the momentum going and continually build on it and track what we're doing. Next slide. All right, so the risk tool, the risk scoring. Our goal here was to identify small water systems and rural or self-supplied communities at risk of drought and water shortage vulnerability. Next slide. So again, we had to engage a lot of stakeholders and get a lot of feedback. It was a very participatory-based approach. We did 2 assessments, one for the small systems and one for the rural, the self-supplied communities. And we had to develop indicators. How do you measure risk? There's a lot of ways of looking at it. The likelihood of something happening coupled with the ramifications of it happening usually are the the key parts to risk. But in terms of what is going to happen or what are factors that might affect things, there's quite a few. So for small systems, we looked up to 29 indicators, and for rural communities, we looked up to 21. And I didn't bring any information to go deep dive, but if you want to, I can happily follow up with the details of what those specific indicators are. But we looked at combining them all as a single index score, scale of 1 to 0 to 100, 0 being no problems whatsoever, 100 being you probably should look at this. And we want to offer this as part of the drought planning to the suppliers, counties, GSAs, and others who can just get online and see relatively a level of risk. It's not an absolute calculated. It's not like you are the most riskful person or something like that, or system. It's meant to be relative compared to how other things are. Just because you're not scoring as high as somebody else doesn't mean you don't have a risk that warrants attention. Next slide. All right, so next slide. Small water systems. We looked at over 2,400 systems, and they were all across the state. One of the things that this graphic points out is there is no place in the state that is free from some sort of drought risk. There's every county, every corner of the state has at least some community systems or small systems that have a fairly high level of risk. The colors here, red, orange, blue, low risk, and there's blue lots of places, and there's orange most places as well. And of course, how you use this, really, you have to understand what's behind the score so that you can plan accordingly. And so it's important that not only do we point out who's got a risk, but what are those exposure factors within those regions. Next slide. So here's a quick synopsis of what you might see if you log on to the tool. Yeah, we have an interactive dashboard so folks can see where they align in the area that they exist, and then they can see a breakdown of all the different factors and how they score on the individual factors. And so, obviously they might not need to put a lot of emphasis on some where they score really well on, but where they've got poor scores, that might be an area to focus. Next slide. Similar approach for the self-supplied communities. Next slide. And my apologies here. I just caught that this morning that we missed a few words here on this first bullet. That should say reliance on domestic wells is not part of the overall risk score. And that's because it would blow everything out. I mean, most of these folks by definition are on a very, on a well, for example, not all, but for the most. And so to point that out as a risk factor is sort of beside the point. That they're on this list as an entity because that's their risk factor. It doesn't help them tease out what other things they might need to look at. So that was not part of their overall score in this particular application. And you can see, again, there's variation across the state. Again, the particular factors that make up someone's score need to be looked at individually to assess what might needs to benefit them. But that there are generally factors that are similar across areas. If you're, for instance, a whole different set of communities on fractured rock, that in of itself has a particular risk associated with it. If you're in a fire area where a lot of your infrastructure is dependent on or is vulnerable to a wildfire, that could affect it too. You might have a great well, but if your pump's going to go out because your power goes out due to fires, your risk becomes higher, that kind of thing. Next slide. So as I said, the risk scores, underlying indicators are visible to everyone through the interactive dashboard. And they can use this information. Various folks can use this information for planning purposes, whether they're the counties or the GSAs. And we're hoping that they'll look at this and okay, where do they need to focus actions or plans? And this is hopefully something that they will look at. This is, and because ideally they see it, they start making adjustments, they start planning, and then the score by definition will have to change because these risk factors would drop. That's why we think it's important to update this on some sort of periodic basis so that we can all see if anybody's making progress, if new things have come up that nobody was considered before, And hopefully everybody's getting, well, in this case, bluer, and reducing the risk overall. Next slide. So as soon as this meeting's over, log off and get on to our website and check it out yourself. There's the link here, and it'll be at the end of the slides as well. You can get on and you can start digging through the information. It went through several iterations. Our first shot, we put it out in draft form, got a lot of feedback. A lot of folks were like, why am I on this list? Or you've got this wrong information, you've got this wrong data. It was very difficult to get everything everyone wants. But once their name's on the page and they see the colors associated, a lot of folks came out saying, oh, what, this is outdated data here, or you missed this, or that kind of thing, which was great. We wanted the more data, the better. And we believe the data will continue to evolve, so we want to be able to periodically update this. With the tool, we've gone out, we've been sharing it. We conducted workshops, it says here in LA County, Lake County, with the Civic Spark Fellows. Oh, I thought that was Tulare County. I messed up. Oh, there it is. And we're already conducting assessments for Tulare and Lake County with the help of our Civic Sparks. And I think that's it. Next slide, last slide. Here's the site again for the tool. And if you want to see the whole report that dictates how this tool was created and all the other recommendations, what was behind them, you can go to one of our website pages here at the department. And that's all I had for you today. Oh, real quick, I'm sorry. My thanks to all the members who helped as well. I know there were several meetings where many of you participated. Member Firestone in particular was rolling up her sleeves and getting involved early on with a lot of this work, and it was very much appreciated.
Yeah, thank you just for the leadership at DWR and the collaborative space. And what I've just been impressed with is that continuity of this data into then our needs analysis that looks even kind of at a broader scope, technical, managerial, financial, and other indicators of risk. But really being able to focus in and drill down into drought risk, given the the complexity of it, and having that as, if you will, a package within the needs assessment has been just incredibly helpful. So I just want to thank you for your leadership, the great work that continues to go on at DWR on this. There's tinges of what's known as AB 1755, the Open Water Data Act, that we're also implementing with you all in the approach and the availability of the data. And just want to thank you for that, for the openness and transparency of the tool. And again, the benefit ultimately to just decision-making writ large in our communities, where that local leadership is so critical to manage through crises like drought, which are slow moving and can be better responded to if we organize ourselves in the right way. So just thank you. On the thought about updating it and bringing in, refreshing the data, where is some of that core data? I imagine some of it maybe was from the annual electronic report perhaps, but I think that doesn't even get to these smaller systems that you were looking at. Was just kind of wondering what the thought around that might be, only because I know, and this is, for further discussion in the next item with the needs analysis, but on that item, we'll be looking to do that likely on a yearly basis, and knowing that there is a lot of that drought data, then, again, that lives there, wanting to already discuss how we might think how we sync up those data activities going into the future. So just any thoughts you might have on that, I'd be interested. And then by all means, board colleagues can join in with any questions. I'll note we have one public commenter for this item.
Well, yeah, data is always key. Throughout my whole career, it's always been about the data, whether it was state water project operations, which I think the last time I talked to this board, I was apologizing for a violated water quality standard in 2004. But how to update the data, will vary. Some of the data, Julie Ekstrom from our shop was just like a champion finding this stuff, pulling it together, working with the team at the board to assemble different information parts, working with locals, working with Indian Health Services, OPR, and others to help us assemble the data sets. Some I think are easier to update than others. Like anything, this was a one and done in terms of the assignment from the legislature, but we really, really want this to continue. So, we're making the appropriate asks for resources to continue on. We'll see how successful we are, but my hope is that if not annually, something not too far thereafter, in terms of updating this information on a basis that folks can utilize, and so that we can show how folks are improving and where folks aren't improving, so that we can redirect resources accordingly. Yeah, I forget the rest of your question. Well, yeah, it was
that was about it.
Data.
Yeah, it was just kind of like the frequency on update, and thank you for that. Not unlike the case with the CDAG report, with our needs analysis, it was a one-time shot from the legislature, as well as our consolation prize, essentially from the Safe and Affordable Fund passage then in 2019. In 2018, it was like, okay, well, here's some money for a needs analysis to just get a better number, because it was part of the principal kind of negotiation on the Safe and Affordable Fund, and now our SAFER program and its implementation, was just, okay, well, what is the extent of the need here? Or what is just the status of so many of these systems? And so, yeah, was a one-time sort of shot, we're looking to just, it needs to be iterative. And so I really appreciate that reflection from you. I think it just matches up well. So looking forward to seeing how the two programs continue to match up that way. Board members, any other thoughts, questions?
Sure, and I know I want to hear from the public on this. I'll just say again, thank you to staff, certainly for leadership at DWR. It's really, I think, one of the most challenging areas, because it really is a gap. And so you're having to pull together stakeholders from so many different agencies, so many different types of groups that really, at the end of the day, don't have this responsibility squarely in their core focus. And that's part of why this has gone unaddressed for so long, at least I think in the way that it needs to be. And I think we know that this issue is one that is really the most acute and kind of human crisis and emergency. From the drought, we saw such human suffering because in these communities, because of really the lack of ability to prepare, assess and manage beforehand, really prepare, and then have things in place to respond adequately. So I really appreciate how thoughtful and comprehensive this whole process has been. The tool itself is amazing. I know a lot of, as you said, a lot of work went into that. It's vital to understanding risk overall within our SAFER program, but it's really helpful to pull out specific related to drought and water shortage. So I just want to really value that as a specific tool that not only helps us at the state level and state agencies to coordinate, but really powerful for locals, that, just pulling together all this data and assessment on their own is, especially for counties that are really strapped, is going to be as hard. I do hope that it can be, really utilized by counties and water systems, as we said, but also now increasingly by GSAs in their planning and implementation around groundwater sustainability plans. One thing that I just want to emphasize as we're, heading into these drought and already in drought conditions in certain areas, and heading into to that in more areas of the state, is how important coordination and communication is early and often and throughout. Both the recommendations around the state level coordination and task forces, how much that really is important. I think a lesson learned we heard from the last drought, but also that really deliberate coordination with counties, with small systems, and the importance of being able to share information about what's working, what resources are available, what data is available, and what the tool can help us prepare for. And lastly, just I do think it's important to recognize that this is very much an issue of racial equity. When we looked at the some of the data that I know a while ago was specific for the San Joaquin Valley, that of those communities that are outside of the incorporated cities, right? And that's really what this is looking at. Of those communities outside of the incorporated cities, those that are low income, basically that are in unincorporated areas, but also concentrated communities, that Latino communities were twice as likely to have to just be on self-supplied, which means they don't have a regulated water system, as opposed to being served by a centralized regulated water system. And I think that just highlights kind of the disproportionate vulnerability of populations based or particularly on racial lines that is important as we look at how the state can address those inequities and sort of, ensure that this area is a priority. So thank you so much. Also, thanks to our staff that was really involved. And I know Board Member McGuire and I got to participate and dig into this, and just the huge amount of coordination and time from stakeholders throughout the state at all levels. I think it's incredibly powerful and important.
Thank you, Board Member. Any other thoughts? Yes, Vice Chair.
Yes, good to see you, Mr. Inohosa, again. Last time we spent much time with each other, it was in the last drought. So I'm just grateful for your work and want to chime in on the compliments given by the chair and Board Member Firestone. I'm really excited about the opportunities that this will bring, not just to those that are directly impacted, but to those that perhaps could provide assistance. And Board Member Firestone highlighted many of those entities, counties and GSAs. So I would just like to hear from you a little bit more about the stakeholder outreach in preparation of this, specifically with respect to those entities and others that might be able to provide helpful partnerships in grappling with these issues.
Yeah, well, the stakeholders were fairly diverse, thankfully. We had county representatives. I remember specifically we had, Tulare County there. We had San Luis Obispo County there. I think Lake County was there as well, which gave us a nice perspective on what they can easily or can't do. We had a lot of community support groups like Self-Help, Community Water Center, which are huge, huge helpers in bringing a diverse set of voices and a realistic understanding of the challenges that are faced. And that's really what it came down to, is like, how do we actually do what in many respects seems pretty straightforward in terms of needing to happen, but actually getting it to happen are the biggest challenges. How do, which community, how many communities like Member Firestone was alluding to, are even have the time to work on something. A lot of them work hard. They have long days and they don't have a lot of resources available to them to participate, and this will take time. So how we can equip a county to better help is part of it. Can we bolster a county's ability? Where can the state itself help with our own staff, either in regional boards or our regional offices, department? How can we leverage community support groups to support them where they can? I mean, some areas have these groups. Not every area has a community support group that is readily available to help steer the communities through their issues. There's no, I don't think there's a clear formula for any in general, I should say. It comes down to rolling up our sleeves and going out and maybe, since our own resources will be limited, we start with the most at risk, the highest, the most vulnerable based on our risk assessment tool, and start approaching them, pull as many resources we can together and get out there and see who we can talk to at all levels of government. One of the things we also talked about was how can we leverage other water suppliers. Some of these self-supplied folks are within the boundaries of a water supplier, but they're not hooked up. Especially like say in the foothills where like Georgetown Divide, for example, they've got quite a broad area. But if you look at the population in their area, not even half of them are actual customers. They all have their own wells. So we don't want those folks to get lost. Is the county seeing them as customers? Because they're not. Is the county prepared to go in there? It's that sort of analysis that needs to continue on. I mean, we saw it in general terms, but seeing it and identifying risk factors, in many respects, is a lot easier than actually getting in there and helping them address those factors.
I appreciate that, especially, targeting the highest priority areas. But I guess I would just suggest, to the extent that resources are available, sort of a roadshow, especially looking at the information here with GSAs. I think that many are looking at these issues, but all are not. And so anything that you and we can do to provide this excellent presentation to those groups, I think could help.
Yeah, we do have it's already happened, or it's about to happen, a workshop in Lake County, sort of highlighting this whole thing to some of the communities there. It's one of the things that our civic sparks are helping us with.
I'd like to invite you to participate in one of the meetings that we have through the San Joaquin Valley Partnership that involves all 8 counties and kind of high-level leadership. So I think that would be a good forum, and I'll be thinking about. I'm sure Board Member Firestone is thinking as well. But if you could spend some time, even regionally, I think that would help getting the word out and getting people to access the tool and use it. Thank you.
Okay. All right.
Yeah, I'm really excited to see that this the report's done and out, and that it really does have such a comprehensive set of recommendations for both small communities and self-supplied folks, and it does highlight just how much work it still is out there that we need to do to provide this assistance. And so I think the other board members made some excellent comments about getting the word out and providing that support. So I was just curious. You had mentioned that you were working with Tulare County and Lake County, I think, on some initial drought, county level drought planning. So wondering about the timing for that. What are your expectations? It seems like those were 2 counties that were pretty significantly impacted in the last drought. So it wouldn't surprise me to see that happen again. So just curious to learn a little bit more about that process.
Yeah, and so am I. And I know that it's happening, but I haven't had a chance to dive down with staff to see exactly where they are with the process. Generally we're piloting how we might implement these recommendations. So it's a matter of identifying communities, helping them understand what their risk factors are, and then looking to see what resources are available to do something about that. Making plans is usually not prohibitively expensive, but implementing a project, to back up a water supply or treat something, that can be quite expensive. But I don't know any of the particulars, to be honest.
Yeah.
But that might be a good, maybe I'll find out, and not maybe, I will find out, and perhaps a subsequent presentation is in order as those efforts come to fruition.
Yeah, that would be great. I'd appreciate that. And just in terms of the fact that we're tackling these 2 counties first, this could serve as a model for the other 56. And so I think it's important to put some thought and some energy behind the support we can provide. So I'd love to work with you on that, and just looking forward to hearing some more as we go forward here. Thanks.
Cool.
Thank you, board members. And let's go ahead and go to, I believe we have 2 public speaker cards at this time. And so first I'd like to call up Eric Goriana from Community Waters Center.
Thank you, Chairman. Appreciate the opportunity. As you said, my name is Eric Royano. I'm a policy advocate with Community Water Center. I just wanted to make just a quick, brief comment. I wanted to thank members of the State Water Board, staff of DWR, and staff from State Water Board who helped us get much needed drought resiliency recommendations finalized through the CDAG report. Although the report's release was delayed, the report comes during a timely moment as the state is taking steps to prepare itself for dry conditions in the summer. The CDAG report makes many positive recommendations for at-risk small water systems and domestic well owners. I wanted to take this time to also appreciate some of the comments that Board Member Firestone made in terms of preparing ourselves as a matter of racial equity. We work with frontline communities in rural areas, and the fact of the matter is that most of these communities are brown communities and often undocumented communities. And so it's important for the state to prioritize these communities. And we really appreciate the state doing its due diligence in the CDAG report. Also wanted to highlight and appreciate comments from Board Member McGuire for highlighting the importance of counties and local planning to take place. This is really a place where we learned that it was a big gap in the past drought, and so we appreciate the urgency and the highlighting of the more work for collaboration in that spectrum. But also we wanted to highlight that also we're partnering with CWA, Clean Water Action, Leadership Council, and CMUA to advance SB 552, which is authored by Senator Hertzberg. I wanted to update you all. For those who didn't know, the bill got out of its first committee and it's heading to its second. So we're happy to see the bill moving forward. And this bill takes action on key recommendations from the CDAG report. And we welcome further discussions with the board about how it tends to implement the report's various recommendations. So thank you very much for the opportunity, and thank you to the board members for the time.
Thank you so much. Really appreciate the good comments. Although not on our ticker here, I think I do see on our virtual speaker card that Crystal Gonzalez is on and potentially looking to comment. Ms. Gonzalez.
Hi, yeah, hello everyone. Good morning, Chair and members. I'd just like to echo a lot of what Eric mentioned. Clean Water Action is in support as long as, sorry, can't speak this morning, along with a lot of other community and water organizations, support SB 552, which will help ensure small and rural communities are better prepared for the next drought. And as Eric mentioned, this bill includes recommendations to improve drought preparedness, such as local planning, data collection, and updated emergency responses, which are very critical and that we've talked about today, discussed today. So I just wanted to flag that, and we also look forward to hearing the board's feedback on the bill and continuing to work together. So thank you very much for all your work.
Thank you, Ms. Gonzalez. Appreciate your advocacy and great contributions, I know, between you and Community Water Center and a number of other organizations and community members, as has been highlighted. We're part of the discussion and just really appreciate that. Well, thank you. I don't have any further comment or question. I appreciate the good thought. I think, much to be done. I think this is just, certainly this report is in many ways just a start. What will be the measure is in the next months, how we use it to bring better decision making to communities, to be responsive, to be prepared, and again, do better in this drought than we did in the last by this issue and by communities. So just thank you for, again, that partnership, Mr. Inohosa. I just really appreciate it. And we'll see you soon. And so unless there's any other comment or
I was just gonna, yeah, I was just gonna add again a thanks and offer that I think all of the panels today really are highlighting tools and opportunities for drought preparedness and response. And so, and to all the points that have been made today, I'll offer, I would love to support through my time and just coordination with all of us at the, state level, to the extent that we can do kind of some real regional outreach and sharing, as Vice Chair Diadamo said, that's really targeted, respecting staff's time, but I think figuring out how we can help make sure people can use the tools and information that were generated here, and also get information on the types of resources that we have. So appreciate that. I think that that'll be a theme for all of these issues that we're, or sort of tools and assistance that we're talking about today. And I think the more that we can coordinate shared outreach, the easier on everyone, and the more comprehensive view that stakeholders and counties and local agencies that are dealing with this have. Thanks.
Thank you, board member. And thank you again. Really appreciate it. See you soon, Art.
Take care.
Okay, next, let's go ahead and take a short break here. We have some space in the schedule and will allow us to be fresh as we really go into the deep dive on our needs analysis. And just incredibly excited for this next item. It is, it sort of pairs up well with what this item was, this deep dive on the CDAG report on drought as a risk indicator, if you will, amongst what we'll hear is a lot of other risk indicators. And so let's go ahead and take or give ourselves a 10-minute break, we'll just say, and we'll come back here at 10:45. See you all soon. All right. Although the countdown is still giving us, another minute. It's actually 10:45 already. So wait as folks. We'll give a moment of buffer here. Laurel, you and I can just have a colloquy. Hello, Mr. Polhamus. Glad you can join us. Okay, well, I think we can get started. Unless, Mr. Loffer, you prefer we have a quorum on camera, if you will. And now we do, so.
Everyone hear me?
Yes, we can. Hello, Miss Abholt. Thank you for joining us this morning. And just want to start off before you start and just say thank you for your incredible leadership of the needs assessment unit, of this work, of a lot of other work as well that I know you have been involved in. And just want to thank you for that incredible leadership. And look forward to your presentation.
And good morning, Chair Esquivel. I'm unmuted now, so I can lead us off into this topic. I definitely want to take this opportunity. What I find is a very, historic moment in my career to see this action come before you. If I could indulge you and give a little bit of an origin story on this, I think it is helpful for people to understand that this isn't just some report that popped out of nowhere, that it took a lot of time and effort to get to this point. Before even the people that worked on it and did the fabulous work on it, there were others that were paving the way associated with this. So if we go back to before even SB 200, there was a time at which we were realizing that we had quite a struggle with the newly developed or newly brought over drinking water program and the water systems that we oversee and the financial program that we were working on, the drinking water SRF and the bond measures that we inherited from the Department of Public Health and how we were going to proceed into that. And at that time, I was in the deputy director for the Division of Financial Assistance, and Cindy Forbes was our deputy director in drinking water, along with Liz Haven, who was on special assignment at the time. We hatched some schemes, and I'll just leave it at schemes, on how we might proceed into this and what we really needed to do in order to try to really get at the different world of drinking water compared to the world we were used to of wastewater utilities and stormwater utilities. Very, very different makeup and different history. And so grappling with that, we put forward some ideas on how to proceed. Of course, as we were making the case for what we needed to do to try to address the needs associated with the drinking water universe, we ran up against the ability to make that case. One of our first attempts at that was the Human Right to Water list. The Human Right to Water policy had been passed by the state and adopted, and we were wholeheartedly moving forward with that. And we definitely were able to grab onto systems that were known to be failing and present those as certainly an obvious need. But I think we understood that there was something deeper behind that when you looked at all the work we had done, and we seemed to be so busy always addressing the ones that were failing and never really feeling like we were fully getting ahead, and changing the circumstance. Certainly we did great projects that helped a tremendous number of communities and spent a lot of the state's money in a really important fashion. But you want to see the numbers go down. You want to feel like you're gaining traction on what the problem is, and the problems seem to be the same. So I think there was a fundamental shift in kind of our thought process associated with this. And to put it kind of briefly, the systems that have failed were not the systems, those systems that were out of compliance was not the problem. It was the systems that were going to be out of compliance. Those that were at risk of failing was how we needed to address this problem and move forward into that space. And just that little shift of thinking away from who's failed and how do I help them to who's about to fail and how do we keep them from failing really makes a bit of a fundamental shift. Now, you saw earlier from a presentation from Mr. Inohosa on the drought risk assessment, and that is a very important part, which we have folded into this report, and I'm sure Ms. Abhold will later discuss how we incorporated that as well as many other data sources we were able to pull together and proceed into this. We see these as additive. The drought risks tool definitely points to one risk factor. As you well know, and everybody in this space knows, there's multiple things needed other than a water supply to keep a water system running. The presentation that you're about to see will go through a lot of that and explain how we've tried to weigh those factors going forward. So luckily, as we were able to get the Safe Affordable Drinking Water Act, SB 200, and with the governor's support, we're able to move forward into this space with this report. Also with some funding from the legislature to make it faster than it was originally conceived of, because it was originally going to be all in-house. And so with the aid of some fabulous contractors and others, we're able to present what I find is, one of the bigger shift change is going on probably in my career from an understanding of really shifting space on this. So with that, while some of us thought up this idea, the good credit, really the most of the credit should go to those that actually accomplished that thought. It's one thing to have an idea, it's another thing to actually pull it off and present it. So with that, I would like to turn it over to Kristen, who led this effort with our staff and many others that helped in this to bring it forward. So Kristen, thank you.
Actually, sorry, before you get started, do you mind if I just say a few words in terms of context? Is that okay?
Sure, fine by me.
Okay, so I just want to emphasize, you talked about the context as we go into this. I have been working on this issue for about 15 years now. And, when I first started, communities in the Valley in particular that I was working with had no idea what was wrong with their water. They knew it was looked brown in some cases, wasn't safe. But, we couldn't get statewide data on which systems were out of compliance that was current. We would get, a couple of years old compliance reports that went to EPA. So there wasn't even currently available data like you see on this screen now about which systems were out of compliance that folks could see statewide. There was no ability to have boundaries of water systems, wells, understanding where wells were in terms of source protection wasn't public. There was no data. I remember having to sit down with Tulare County and ask them to help go through just the number of small systems that they regulate to understand which ones weren't able to meet standards. So just to give a sense of how far we've come from that, this is such a huge, I just want to recognize what a huge historic effort this is. We are so far beyond that on all levels, right? In terms of data, in terms of understanding, in terms of evaluating, understanding which systems are failing, which systems are at risk, as we said. And I just think as we look at, in 2012, we adopted the human right to water. This was really driven by communities that said, we want people to understand and recognize that there are communities in California without access to safe water, and that this is a basic human right. And at that time, I think one of the very first pieces was, we have to get a handle on what this problem looks like statewide. And we didn't have it then. And since then, I think certainly the state board, as we took over the drinking water program, has just taken that head on and I think really enables us to actually live up to that human right to water. And we still have a lot of work to go, but understanding fundamentally what we're trying to address is key. And this report goes so far beyond that, and I think we'll hear today, but not only understanding the challenges, but also really starting to dig in and understand what are the solutions, what will they cost, how do we understand kind of looking more holistically, not just at systems, but also even these self-supplied communities. So I am just so grateful. I think this is incredibly historic. It really is one of the things I'm just like most proud that we've been able to do. And I just want to say thank you as staff goes into kind of digging into these details.
Thank you, board member. Ms. Abhold.
Thank you, everyone. I appreciate the opportunity to present this work to you today. Before I begin, I just want to say that I am speaking on behalf of a very large team that worked on this entire report, which included staff from across the water board, not just within DDW and our needs analysis unit, but within DWQ, OPP, a lot of support from DIT, a huge team of folks, and then our amazing contractors. You'll hear from Greg with UCLA in just a little bit, but we had a lot of subcontractors as well, Pacific Institute, Corona Environmental, Sac State Office of Water Program, and the University of North Carolina Environmental Finance Center. And we also coordinated a lot with DWR. You'll hear about that in just a bit, and also OWIHA. And then we've had lots and lots of stakeholder involvement in this process and the development of the methodologies that resulted in this report. And we'll try to touch on some of those meetings later in the presentation too. So with that being said, and Darren gave a great introduction, and this all starts with the human right to water, with our list of failing water systems. And you'll see on the screen here, and this is an early map. We actually currently have about 331 systems that are meeting our failing criteria. And we call these systems our human right to water list systems, because they're failing to meet the goals of the human right to water. And really, if you look at systems that are failing, most of them, 90%, are those that are small. They have 500 service connections or less. And you'll see how that kind of plays into our analysis later. Next slide, please. And as Darren mentioned, our human right to water and this challenge of systems that are coming onto the human right to water list every year helped spur the passage of SB 200 and the creation of the SAFER program. Again, the SAFER program does span across many divisions within the water board. But what's fantastic about SB 200 and the SAFER program is that we have a set of tools and resources to really help systems that are currently out of compliance, that are on our human right to water list, but also to identify those systems that maybe are at risk of failing. And you'll see here, I'm going to focus a little bit on the first two tools in our toolbox, little tongue twister there, our Safe and Affordable Drinking Water Fund, which is our new funding source that helps support the SAFER program. And we couple that with other funding programs, but this is a new one that has a broad set of eligibilities. And then data collection and analysis, the fun stuff. We have other things that we do under the SAFER program. We have consolidation, regional solutions that our engagement units are spearheading. We have administrators, and we are providing technical assistance and capacity building resources as well. But again, I want to focus on these first two icons here. Next slide, please. So what is the needs assessment? We're hearing a lot about this big report that's out, and I wanted to provide a little bit of context about what's in it and why we have to do it. SB 200 requires that this new Safe and Affordable Drinking Water Fund has an annual fund expenditure plan, which helps prioritize how we target financial and technical assistance underneath this new program. And it says in SB 200 that the fund expenditure plan should be informed by this annual needs assessment. And like Darren mentioned, the original idea of this needs assessment came before SB 200, and it was a contract with UCLA and our subcontractors. But we worked over the last year and a half to really pivot the scope of this work to align with the goals of SB 200. And you'll see here that our needs assessment has 3 core components. It has a risk assessment, a cost assessment, and affordability assessment. You'll see underneath each of these icons kind of who each assessment applies to. Our risk assessment is identifying those systems that are 3,300 service connections or less in K through 12 schools, state small systems, and domestic wells that are at risk of failing. And we will go over kind of our definition of failure in just a little bit. Our cost assessment then says, here's our list of human right to water list systems, those that are failing, and here's our list of at-risk state small systems and domestic wells. What is the price tag to bring these systems into compliance, to help them prevent them from falling out of compliance? And we really wanted to take a look at the full cost of implementation of solutions, not just the cost to the state water board. We also did a gap analysis, a funding gap analysis as part of our cost assessment. We looked at available funding within the state water board's grant and loan programs to try to determine whether or not we would have enough to meet our estimated needs. And I'll go over those results in just a bit. And then we did an affordability assessment, which is looking at our disadvantaged communities statewide, trying to understand the full breadth of affordability challenges that may exist across the state, which is going to influence our decisions, I think, around how we target our financial assistance underneath the SAFER umbrella. Next slide, please. So this is our challenge, and again, framed really well by Darren earlier. Approximately 47 unique water systems are added to the human right to water list each year. But we really needed a mechanism, a methodology for identifying those systems that may come out of compliance. We like to call it our early warning system to identify those at-risk water systems. And I'm going to turn it over to Greg from UCLA, who helped us develop this methodology for public water systems. Greg?
Thanks, Kristen. Next slide, please. So I'm going to briefly run through the details of the risk assessment for public water systems. Again, it's entailed looking at systems with 3,300 connections or fewer, as well as K through 12 schools, which I believe amounts to 2,779 systems at the present time. And the risk assessment methodology for water systems really has 3 core components, as you can see on the screen. The first, of course, would be to identify the indicators or metrics that really convey risk of water systems falling out of compliance. And we actually looked at, I believe it says on the next slide, we started out with 129 risk indicators and sort of narrowed down to 19. Through a very engaged external and internal stakeholder process, review of the data and review of the literature. And those 19 risk indicators that are included in the inaugural needs assessment really fall in 4 categories, which you can see on the left-hand side of the screen: water quality, water accessibility, affordability, and then technical, managerial, financial capacity, or TMF. Once risk indicators were identified, the next step was really to set thresholds or numerical point values for each risk indicator that conveyed when exceedance of the threshold or multiple thresholds for an indicator meant that a water system would be more at risk. And then the last step in terms of the methodology was to apply weights both to individual indicators as well as across categories to convey relative differences in the importance or criticality of both indicators and categories in contributing to overall risk. Next slide. So here's the list of the 19 risk indicators that were selected from an original 129 proposed risk indicators. And I should say the narrowing down process, a lot of it was based on the need, given the needs assessment and the risk assessment, is going to be conducted annually for indicators that relied on data that was refreshed, high quality, and publicly available. You can see here, I'm not going to run through each of the indicators, but the indicators were spread across the 4 categories, with water quality having the highest number of indicators, 6 indicators. I just want to call out one of the indicators comes directly from partner agency OWIHA through its Human Right to Water report, and that would be the maximum duration of high potential exposure. Next, 5 risk indicators were derived for the accessibility category. And again, want to call out that one of those was from the Department of Water Resources Drought and Water Shortage Risk Assessment process, which we just heard a presentation on preceding this. And then in terms of TMF capacity, 5 indicators were also selected. And TMF capacity is where you see the emphasis on system size through the number of service connections risk indicator, given, as was presented by Darren, the outsized risk that's been observed among smaller systems within this system universe. Then last but not least, the affordability category included 3 indicators, which you'll also hear presented on in the affordability assessment. And I will note, as I'm sure Kristen will also say, that there's already an effort to increase both the sort of the number and the quality of affordability indicators going into the future through additional data collection efforts by the board. Next slide. So how was all of this used? How was the methodology and the indicators applied, and what were the results? Again, we have a lot of detail. There is a lot of detail in the final report, as well as previous white papers and webinars on how we got to this point. But among the 2,779 systems that were analyzed in the risk assessment, you can see the results here. And essentially, excluding the human right to water list systems from the analysis, although those systems were used to calibrate the results and thresholds for determining whether systems were at risk, you can see that 617 systems were designated as at risk, and I believe that is about 25% of the systems considered. 552 systems were scored as potentially at risk, and that's 23% of the universe of systems. And then 1,284 systems were scored as not at risk, and that equates 52% of the systems considered. The final thing I'd mention, and I'm sure Kristen will again mention it later, is that the data for the risk assessment, both the raw and processed data, is already available online, thanks to the efforts of the Needs Analysis Unit staff. And the data for the risk assessment is already being refreshed in the near future to take account of enhancements. And also there's an opportunity for water systems to request or solicit data changes that can be found on the Water Board's website. With that, I want to thank you for your time and turn things back over to Kristen.
Thanks, Greg. It was an amazing effort to get us where we're at. I forgot to mention earlier that there were 14 public workshops that were hosted over the last year and a half to get us to this point. So we're excited to be presenting the results, as you can imagine. I'm going to do my best to speak for our Division of Water Quality to discuss their risk assessment methodology and results for state smalls and domestic wells. We did have to create 2 different methodologies for the risk assessment due to data limitations and constraints. The methodology that Greg discussed was the one employed for our public water systems. We had a different approach for our state small water systems and domestic wells, where we combined water quality estimates based on samples of wells at a depth where we think most domestic wells and state small wells would be drawing water from, estimated the potential for water quality contamination. And those systems that are kind of in these red zones here are most at risk of having water quality above an MCL. This is called the Aquifer Risk Map, and it is available on our website to explore. If you go to the next slide, please. Based on the analysis done by the Division of Water Quality, using again our best available data, both from water quality, but also on our locations of state small water systems and domestic wells, it's estimated that 611 state small water systems are at risk, and nearly 80,000 domestic wells may be at risk. Again, I really encourage folks to check out the Aquifer Risk Map. It is an amazing tool and resource. I do want to highlight before we move on, it came up in previous presentations today. There is a limitation in data here. This is our best available count of where we think state smalls and domestic wells are. We do have a new effort underway currently, which is required under SB 200 for counties to submit to the water board water quality and location data for state smalls and domestic wells, and that effort is ongoing right now, and we're hopeful to have a good data set by the end of the year, and happy to talk about that later. But those are the results of our risk assessment. Next slide, please. Our next step was then to take our human right to water list and our at-risk list of systems and model potential interim and long-term solutions for those systems so that we could do a cost estimate, again, to figure out what that price tag might be to provide solutions to these communities. There was a lot of work done, and you can definitely dig into the methodology if you're interested in our paper, but I wanted to just focus on kind of what was the selected solution type for these different types of systems. You'll see here that we looked at treatment for water quality issues for our human right to water list systems, because we know that those systems are out of compliance for water quality violations. We did look at physical consolidation as a potential solution for all of our systems here, POE, POU, and then we also looked at other essential infrastructure and technical assistance for our human right to water list and at-risk public water systems. And other essential infrastructure really are those things that are probably needed to help bring a lot of these systems into a more sustainable environment, more resilient. So it included things like potentially a new well, distribution replacement, energy and backup power issues, new meters, those sorts of things. I wanted to emphasize for our cost estimate and for these modeled solutions that these modeled solutions were not selected on just cost alone. We did not have our model choose the lowest cost solution. Instead, we had a fairly complicated analysis that looked at the resiliency, the sustainability and resiliency of the potential modeled solutions and the long-term cost of the solutions. And we have kind of, if you look in our paper, this decision tree that got us to these selected modeled solutions. I do want to emphasize here, because it's been called out a few times during our public workshops, physical consolidation was modeled for 35% of our human right to water list systems as a potential solution. But you see here was 20% was selected. And often that was due to the cost limitations and also some limitations around distance. And I know it might come up later in Q&A, so I might just hit on it now. Physical consolidation here was a one-to-one analysis looking at a 3-mile pipeline along a road off of a surface area boundary or within a surface area of an existing water system. Our analysis did look at regional consolidation and identified regions within the state where regional consolidation may be a possibility. However, those results were not incorporated into the cost assessment at this time, even though that analysis found cost savings from a regionalization approach. We couldn't include it in the model this year, mostly because we don't have enough data around some of the LAFCO legal limitations and whether or not those modeled regionalization projects would even be feasible And so before we start costing things out, we want to try to get more to a better sense of what's feasible and what's not. But that analysis is included in the report. Next slide.
Quick question for you on this. Sorry.
Go for it.
The column there that says no solution for at-risk, I think,
Yeah.
state small. If you could just explain that a little bit.
Yeah, no, that's a great thing to call out. So we were able to get actual water quality location data from Monterey County. So we got very specific data from Monterey, but not for the rest of the state. And there were some systems in Monterey where their nitrate level was so high that POE/POU would not be a solution for them. And also physical consolidation would not be a solution for them. We didn't look at treatment as a solution this year for state small systems, but that's probably where they would need to go. Does that help?
Yeah, that's very helpful. Thank you.
Great. Okay. Next slide. Thank you. So our cost assessment model helped us identify what we would say are the modeled solutions for our at-risk and human right to water list systems. But in order to figure out what that final price tag is, we had to really do a lot of thinking about how costs really break out for communities and for the state. So we had to refine our cost estimates, and what we did was we projected out 5 years to try to estimate what that cost would be for the state, looking at our projected number of human right to water list systems and at-risk systems that would be coming on the list each year. Now, we didn't go out the full breadth of the program, 9 years from now, mostly because there's just too much unknown. We anticipate probably new regs, drought, that are going to complicate things, which would really make our cost numbers probably not realistic when we go out that far. So we were trying to be conservative and we kept it at 5-year estimates. What we did was we looked at the costs and then we had to break them up into pieces. How much is grant eligible based on project eligibilities and community characteristics? If you are a small economically disadvantaged community, you're more eligible for grant dollars compared to a larger water system that's not economically disadvantaged. And so our number, we identified about 3.25 billion of the price tag is eligible for grant. We then looked at everything that's not eligible for grant. That's often called local cost share, because if it's not grant, then the costs have to be borne by the community. It's either going to be, through a loan or through pay as they go if they have cash on hand. But the ratepayers and the community are on the hook for those costs. That local cost share is $7 billion, and 4.05 billion is actually eligible for State Water Board loans. The remainder, 2.95 billion, is not eligible for State Water Board loans. And that includes some capital costs, especially for those larger non-DAC water systems, O&M costs that aren't met by a grant, and interest payments. And it was really important that we calculated the cost of financing interest payments as part of the long-term implementation price tag, because that makes everything more expensive. So our 5-year total refined cost of implementing solutions for our human right to water list systems and at-risk systems is $10.25 billion. Next slide, please. We used that breakdown of need to help us identify our funding and financing gap with the State Water Board resources at our disposal. Our grant funding gap over this 5-year time period is estimated to be about $2 billion. And on our financing, our loan gap is also about $2.5 billion. I do want to emphasize, however, that this analysis was only looking at State Water Board grant and loan programs. It did not include other programs that are available throughout the state to support these types of solutions. DWR has resources and other agencies, including the federal government, USDA's Rural Development Program, and others. So we did in the report include a breakdown of other funding sources that water systems and communities could try to seek funding and financing assistance from. But due to the limitations in kind of data availability for those programs, not sure how much would actually be able to cover some of the costs that we've modeled. Those are kind of the drivers for why they were not included in the gap analysis. Next slide, please. So that was our cost estimate results and our gap analysis results. The final component of our needs assessment was this affordability assessment. And unlike the risk assessment and the cost assessment, this was looking at a very different kind of set of water systems. We looked at all community water systems. And our goal here was to identify those communities that may be struggling with affordability challenges. So before I dig into what we did here, I do like to start off talking about affordability definitions, mostly because in SB 200, it says that we need to identify those communities that are charging water rates that are above the water board's affordability threshold. But there's no definition for what affordability threshold is. And so as we kind of explore how the water board wants to define what affordability threshold is, I think it's important for us to step back and look at what affordability might mean in the context of water. I like to start with household affordability because I think that's where most people go when they think about affordability challenges. And really, household affordability is the ability of individual households to pay for an adequate supply of safe drinking water. Can they pay for their water services? Household affordability then contributes to community level affordability. It's the ability of households within a community to pay for water services and financially support a resilient water system. You may have a community that has households, a certain number of households that are facing affordability challenges, but as a whole, the community is able to financially support the water system so that it can provide safe and drinking water. But sometimes you have a community where enough households are struggling to pay their water bill, where then the water system may not get enough revenue to support their needs. And really that's all connected to then the water system, financial capacity. And when we're looking at a water system's financial capacity, you have to both look in the short run and the long run. Are they bringing in enough revenue to support their immediate O&M needs? But also, are they bringing in enough to meet some of their long-term infrastructure investment needs to their capital planning, asset management, all of that, so that they are resilient for the future? And it's all interconnected, right? Because when a water system needs to increase their rates, it's going to impact household affordability, and it's all interconnected. So hopefully this helps kind of set the stage for when we talk about affordability, when we talk about affordability thresholds, there are different metrics, there are different things that we can look at within each of these definitions to help us assess affordability. Next slide, please. So what did we do this year? We went a little bit beyond what was done in last year's fund expenditure plan, which looked at this first indicator, which is percent median household income. And for those who aren't familiar with percent median household income, really what this is looking at is you look at a household's income and how much of their annual income are they spending on water services. If we have historically used at the water board a 1.5% threshold to distinguish between those that may be experiencing affordability issues and those that are not. And then others outside the water board, like US EPA and others, have used 2.5% as a threshold. And so we looked at both here. What we did differently this year is we added 2 new affordability indicators, which were also used in our risk assessment and identified through our stakeholder engagement process. We use extreme water bill, which is also looking at customer charges, but instead of looking at it in conjunction with income, it's looking across the state and saying, if you have a water system that's charging customers 150% or 200% above the statewide average, then you may be experiencing affordability challenges in your community. And the last one here is percent shutoffs for non-payment. This is coming from our electronic annual report data. Systems that have 10% or more of their residential customer base experiencing shutoffs due to non-payment, then that is potentially an indicator that affordability challenges persist in that community. I do want to emphasize this data was our 2019 data from our EAR, and we recognize that the 2020 EAR data will only really have 2 months worth of shutoff data due to the COVID shutoff moratorium. So this indicator will probably definitely not be used in our assessment next year, both for the affordability assessment and the risk assessment. We were hoping to use a broader list of indicators this year for affordability, but we do have limitations in our data here. But we are collecting new data through our EAR this year for the 2020 reporting year that we're hoping to include next year. Next slide, please. So what were the results? Again, SB 200 calls out the need to identify our DAC and SDAC systems that are above the affordability threshold. And you can see here the number of DAC and SDAC systems that were above the minimum threshold for each of the indicators. The most systems are in the percent MHI category, but we also have systems that exceeded the threshold for extreme water bill and not as many in percent shutoffs. We do include in our report a breakdown also of the number of systems that exceeded 1, 2, or all 3 of the thresholds for each indicator if you're interested in learning more. Next slide, please. I only touched on really a small piece of all the analysis that was conducted and is included in the full report. So I want to encourage everyone to check it out. It is available on our website. We do have a form for folks to request data change requests or to make data change requests. We recognize, especially our water rates data, may not be accurate for a lot of folks. We've seen some data reporting issues there. So we do provide an opportunity to have some data change requests made here. We also hosted a 3-hour webinar last week, providing an overview of the results, and that recording is being added to our website today, if people want to learn more through that. And that's it.
Thank you. Yeah, and again, if folks want to really dive deep into some of the methodologies and the statistical methods and data that we use, that 3-hour deep dive is a fantastic overview of the work. So if this, amuse-bouche, if you will, this taste of the work has you wanting to dig in deeper, as Greg said, the work and data is all available online as well. So you can follow along, do your own analysis, make use of this data in ways that really add value and ultimately enrich the local leadership and embrace of these challenges that we really, I think as a theme, are looking for communities to be partners with us in. And I hope that we've done well by everyone and keeping the faith. And the 14 public workshops I really appreciate because it has driven to a really great product ultimately here. And just again, thank everyone for their time on it. We do have a couple of folks on public comment, but board members, do you have any other thoughts? My main question would be is because there is still gaps in data, and I think particularly we see that in the affordability side, but what would you prioritize amongst it all? Knowing that this will be a bit of an iterative yearly opportunity to refresh things, where would, in these first few years, where would you kind of focus? And this is both for you, Kristen and Greg, focus, some of our, greatest need. Yeah, how would you kind of prioritize it, I guess, on the data side?
Yeah. Obviously on the financial capacity side, but I think we've made some good strides already this year before the report was even released to try to get a head start on that with our electronic annual report. But really, I think the biggest opportunity and need for refinement is better indicators and data around source capacity. especially, I mean, we've heard a lot today about the challenges around drought, and we really need to improve our data on source to identify systems that are experiencing source capacity issues. And that's something that we are starting to work on internally. And I'm very hopeful that we'll have a solution there soon. And I'm sure Greg would speak to this as well. We definitely would love to see more robust, I think, TMF capacity indicators, although I think we have a fantastic bunch in there. I think we can do better. And if you take a look at the 129 potential risk indicators that were identified during our development process, there's a great list to start on there. Greg, did you want to add some?
Not really. I mean, I think you said it all. I would definitely emphasize the F and the TMF, so financial capacity, as well as the affordability metrics that Kristen already mentioned. So I think on the other categories, I mean, largely the exercise we did, there's a lot of it for water quality and accessibility. I think the source capacity could be enhanced, but for affordability and TMF, it is a matter of new data, and you're already working on that. So I look forward to seeing it.
Thank you for that. You know, the other comment I was just going to make is this, to my mind, and I think to a lot of folks' minds, comes just very well timed when we are looking at the national discussion around infrastructure, around our need to invest in infrastructure, but more importantly, invest in communities who have not been the beneficiary of the majority of investments that have, gone either from the state or the federal government, and are these particularly smaller systems without the real capacity even to come into the programs that we've traditionally established for some of our larger systems. So there is as Board Member Firestone said on the last item, when it comes to drought vulnerability, an incredible race component to this, and a racial equity discussion that's embedded in how we view our communities, how we extend service and drinking water and standards to in a way that I think is, again, always very surprising to us all, that, as Americans and as particularly Californians, we don't all share the level of access to clean water and sanitation or air, for that matter, and other health indicators or areas very impactful to health. So just thank you, because I think this allows us to be prepared for what may be very well significant federal investment. We've already seen a number of programs and dollars and assistance flowing to the state from the feds because of the COVID pandemic. And now, as we really kind of try to get to a finer point on where we need to be with infrastructure, again, the data here is going to serve those opportunities and solutions to actually address this challenge in a really specific and definitive way. And so just a huge thanks again for all the disparate leadership in the state that has really allowed us to kind of all self-assess in a really critical way for systems that, again, we've left behind and are bearing the brunt of the climate crisis. And here, even more timely so with drought on our doorstep. So and here in front of us even. So thank you. Other board members, thoughts and comments?
I'll wait for
Firestone.
I'll wait till after public comment for most, but just to follow up on your question on the data side, Kristen, do you mind, or anyone, do you mind just talking about the key data sources that are going to be really important going forward? I think I know that you mentioned the electronic annual report, which we've been doing a lot of work on, but that how we're actually going to be regularly able to collect data that are essential in being able to do this analysis.
No, that's a great question, Laurel. And we do detail in our report and our white papers all of our key data sources and the limitations of them, to be honest. Our big data sources that we currently rely upon are the electronic annual report and our SIDWIS database and water quality data that comes through right now, WQIR, and we have another one coming online very soon. And then obviously we did use the DWR results, and would love to see that effort continue, because I think that is a very important data set to include in our analysis. There was data used to inform the cost assessment model that was pulled from sanitary surveys. However, those sanitary surveys are in PDF forms, they're not machine readable. There's so much great data in our sanitary surveys, and I'd love for those to be a data source. Unfortunately, we don't have the staff capacity to digitize sanitary surveys, but that's my hope for the future. But we definitely rely on mostly our electronic annual report and our SIDWIS data for our work. But that could definitely broaden as we move forward.
Thank you. Other board members' initial thoughts? We can go to our commenters. I believe it's we have 2 commenters, and sorry, I lost my. I'll wait for the scroll to scroll back up. I believe our first commenter is Mr. Eric Oriana. So. And you should be invited to unmute any moment now. There you are.
Thank you, Chairman. Sorry, I was having just a bit of an
Oh,
issue.
it's okay. No, it's okay. At least good to see you again.
Thank you very much. Really wanted to say a big thank you to all board members and State Water Board staff who were instrumental to the release of this needs assessment. As board member Firestone was saying, this is a historic moment as we're getting much needed data to really get us closer to providing drinking water solutions to the most vulnerable communities and the communities with the most need. We think this report gives us an opportunity to dig into the level and types of need related to drinking water access that hasn't been possible before. So really historical moment for us. So thank you, everyone. We're still reviewing the report. It's a big report, so we'll take some time on this, but we've identified a number of technical and policy questions that we'll be following up with staff soon. So we look forward to those conversations. And in the meantime, this report sends a loud and clear signal that more funding investments are needed. And if we are to close the water access gap in California and build greater drought and water shortage resiliency in the face of climate change, then we need to start getting to work soon. And I appreciate a lot of the comments made, especially the one from Mr. Greg Pierce, in terms of we really need a lot of the F side of things, which is a lot of financial portion. So thanks so much. Really appreciate the opportunity, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you for your good comments and engagement in this this process. Again, I think of all the indicators, 120 plus, and it was because of the great input that we had, and then even the narrowing down and the methodological development. So just thank you for the good input and continued collaboration in it all. Next, I think we have Crystal Gonzalez from Clean Water Action.
Ms. Gonzalez, go ahead and try again to unmute.
Okay, there we go. Yeah, sorry, too many. So hi again, and I want to also thank you all for the work that has gone into this analysis, and also the opportunities to engage in the process and development of this needs assessment, which has been a process for sure. And as many of you have mentioned, as board member Firestone mentioned, this is a huge achievement and milestone, and we really look forward to ensuring that we use this data and this tool to bridge and streamline water quality and access solutions in terms of the funding opportunities that are available, and really streamlining these projects, right? And so I just want to say we look forward to continuing to work in collaboration with you all, and yeah, so thank you so much.
Thank you, Ms. Gonzalez. Thank you. That concludes our public commenters for the item. Board members, thoughts, questions, follow-up?
Yeah, I have some. I'll jump in. Now I get to jump into some of the details, sort of recognizing, I think, just the amazing work. This is so rich, right? There's so much here. There's so much to dig into, so much kind of just insights and data and exploration of really understanding the problem. So I want to just first say, in some ways, this is like the first step to have this incredibly rich piece of work. One thing I also just initially wanted to pull out from your Kristen's presentation was the piece on the regionalization work, because one of the most surprising things I saw in that was how hugely the price drops potentially. I mean, I think it was 68% for per connection costs, which is huge. So I think, that's really a clear area to dig in more as we move forward and are looking at solutions. So I wanted to highlight that as, and I'll go through a few more things that I think just as we dig in, look forward to exploring more. And as I go through these, I don't think this is all stuff that our staff explores. A lot of what this is really creating public information and data so that partners of all sorts can dig in and develop more insights. So that's one area I think there's just a huge potential to understand better. Another area I think is just really digging into the risk analysis, risk indicators. There's so much there as well. And I think as we look for that in each step, there's, again, a lot that we can dig into. So when we did our initial analysis, there was, as you said, a lot of the indicators that I think rated high as in their appropriateness for predicting risk, there just wasn't adequate data for. And so again, as we think about the areas to dig into for the future, I think data access and collection on a statewide level is going to be a key one, and really trying to develop and ensure that we have the right data to allow us to adequately assess risk is a key area, like you said, especially on affordability and technical managerial financial capacity in particular. I remember looking at the technical and managerial financial capacity ones, and it was like all the things we'd really like to have, we just didn't have data for. The other thing I think would be really interesting that for future work, and maybe this is more on the academic side, Greg and others, but just is being able to, and I don't know, if it's regression analysis or what it is, but really trying to look at data and understand what indicators are really the best predictors of systems failing. I think we did this first cut as, I think probably the right ones. We had, a lot of good information in going there, but even more analysis and robust analysis on what really are the predictors of failing. Because as Darren pointed out, we're seeing many systems coming onto the human right to water list each year. So digging into that, I think would be ideal. And I know we all, I know that was an area that folks were on the wish list, I guess. And then the other area I think is interesting to explore is this idea of how we're, like, the thresholds we set, the weighting that we do, and then this idea that, we wanted to come up with an at-risk list. And so ultimately we also just combined all these areas. And the reality is, you can get on the failing list for just one of those, right? Like if the water quality goes is over a threshold alone. Even if you rate really great on the other ones, you could fail. And I know we tried to take a lot of that into account, but just thinking about as we just talked about drought, water supply, we're seeing with COVID, the affordability crisis, that just how we think about and are looking at risk, even just piecing apart and understanding how we're looking at weights, thresholds, and kind of whether the combined approach really makes sense as we're trying to understand risk when we pull all those together. I mean, I think, for what we needed to do for this, that really makes sense. But just as we kind of dig into, like I said, the richness that is here. And I guess the last kind of 2 points, maybe combined, is just given how rich this is and really foundational, a key thing is going to be dissemination of this and being able to really engage with regions in particular, all actors at the local level and regional level, as well as state and federal partners, about what this is saying, what potential risk is within, local communities that may not be as visible to local actors that could be essential for actually ensuring everyone has safe drinking water. I really hope that we can, and want to, I know our staff are interested in looking to do this, but I think just emphasizing the need to do some of that really focused outreach and engagement around a lot of this data, and then resources and resource needs is going to be critical to ensuring this has the impact that I think it can and should have. And not just really, when we think about this overall issue, in some ways, the funding and the assistance is somewhat the easy part. Like, it's not easy on a political level over many years I've seen, but we've gotten there, right? Where this is a priority in terms of state and federal funding. We need a lot more. We've identified that, but that's only one piece of the puzzle to solving this. And so much, really, at the end of the day, this is our folks on the ground able to get solutions in place. And we are one partner in that, but this isn't going to be solved unless locals are and partners at all level are able to make this happen. So I think we just need to look at this as our ability to be a good partner, to be proactive in that, and to really ensure that we're empowering the locals to get solutions in place that are going to be sustainable and achieve ultimately, I think, what we've set as our goal for the state. Thanks.
Thank you so much, board member. Other fellow board colleagues?
Thank you, Board Member Firestone, for that detailed comments. I think, given your passion, interest, and history in this subject, it's heartwarming to hear you be so excited and so enthusiastic about this effort. So thank you for your commitment on this matter. And of course, thank you to everyone who worked on it. I don't have much to say except to give you a heads up, although I think Kristen may know already. The Central Valley Regional Water Board has expressed a great deal of interest, obviously, in this report. I will provide them with a really just brief summary at their next board meeting later this week. And my guess is they will request at some point a more detailed presentation from the team. And I wanted to make Board Member Firestone aware of that, and if she's interested, to also be involved in that Regional Water Board meeting. But again, this is a significant undertaking and a significant accomplishment, and my congratulations to everyone.
Thank you, board member. Any other thoughts, comments? And if not, we can thank folks for the good work and conclude the item. Okay. Well, thank you again. Really appreciate it, Kristen. And thank you, Greg, for joining us here. And look forward to the further iteration of this work, rather, and knowing that there's already some changes in line for the electronic annual report, looking to see how that gets incorporated and how we continue to do well by the work. So just thank you. And to board member Firestone, again, just great thanks for her leadership in this space as well, and getting us just, again, a really incredible product in the end. Next, okay, that concludes that informational item and brings us to our last in this tranche of informational items, and sort of a build up to then, well, we've had this discussion around drought, we have the needs analysis. So now we're going to discuss drought and response to impacted drinking water systems and some lessons learned from the previous drought then, which will be, I think, great to kind of cap off this discussion around as we manage through current drought. And so thank you. Appreciate Leslie, Deputy Director Loudon and Deputy Director Polhamus here, head of the Division of Financial Assistance and Division of Drinking Water, respective. So you two, we're in the thick of it in the last drought, given that it was only 5 or 6 years ago here that we were in the teeth of those dry conditions. And so just thank you for that continuity of leadership here at the board, actually, and look forward to the presentation here.
Okay, well, I will start it off for us. Good morning, Chair Esquivel. It's still morning, and board members. I'm Leslie Loudon, Deputy Director of the Division of Financial Assistance. And I'm here to wrap up today's discussions on drought and drinking water by talking about our lessons learned and our plans for the future and some of the things that we're working on right now regarding drought funding and reporting. And as you mentioned, helping me is Darren Polhamus, the Deputy Director of the Division of Drinking Water. Next slide, please. Okay, to provide some context, I'd like to start out by talking about the projects we funded during the 2014 to 2017 drought. And then I'll go over our current projects that we have in place to help out with emergencies, including drought emergencies. We'll talk about the lessons learned, as we mentioned, and then some recommendations that we've been working on regarding improved reporting for the drought projects. So next slide, please. This map and graph show the number and types of emergency projects that the Water Board funded during the 2014 through 2017 drought. There were 123 well projects for 22.7 million. Most of those were repair and rehabilitation, but also some of those included well replacements and new wells. We had 116 bottled water projects for 14.3 million. We had 3 projects for households and small systems, and those projects served multiple systems. It wasn't just 3 individual households, obviously. We had 21 projects for treatment and 57 projects with tanks and/or hauled water. We also had 24 projects for consolidations or emergency interties, and as you can see, those projects were spread throughout the state. So in total, the Water Board funded 356 projects for 55.5 million. So it was a lot of projects. Oftentimes, communities had, several projects. They may get some interim supplies while working on, the longer term projects. And this is just the Water Board funding. There was also funding available through the Department of Water Resources. The California Office of Emergency Services provided a lot of funding, and they were really there for the real critical immediate response on a lot of the drought issues. So they had quite a bit of funding. And then also the U.S. Department of Agriculture funded a lot of drinking water projects. Next slide. So these next 2 slides are listing the projects that we have right now, and they're really continuation of projects that were initiated during the last drought. Some of our newer regional programs, such as the Self-Help Regional Bottled Water Program, the Central Coast Regional Program, and the Household Well Replacement Program, were created following the drought to respond to the continuing funding needs, but doing it on a regional basis, which is a much more efficient way for us to administer the funding. And These are continuing projects that are in place right now and will be able to help us to respond as the drought conditions continue or worsen. Next slide, please. And this slide shows just the other programs that we currently have in place that could be used to help with the drought emergency. They're mostly bottled water though, and so that doesn't really provide adequate water if somebody is having a water outage, you know, to deal with cooking and sanitation and things like that. This is just bare minimum bottled water. So the total for the funding that we currently have in place is about $11 million, although we are working on some projects with our technical assistance providers to look at where we have gaps and being able to add some additional funding potentially for emergencies through some of our existing technical assistance programs. Next, please. So from a funding perspective, we learned a few things that can help expedite responding to drinking water emergencies going forward. I think I heard Board Member Firestone say this earlier, but coordination is the key. With so many different sources of funds and the differing requirements regarding eligibility, environmental conditions, et cetera, getting all the funding agencies talking early on really helped to figure out which funding source could be tapped for the different projects. We had many, many regular coordination meetings with the state and federal agencies, and then also many project-specific meetings to work out all the details and the requirements between the agencies. We also met regularly with USCPA and with Indian Health Services to try to address some of the tribal needs. And it's certainly added complexity for both the funding agencies and the recipients to have multiple funders on a project. If possible, it would be preferable to have just one agency fund the entire project, just have one agreement, one set of invoicing and reporting requirements. It would really help the systems as they're trying to get their projects constructed, you know, under these emergency conditions and get reimbursed in a timely manner during the emergency. The reporting to multiple different sources also really complicated matters, and it took a lot of staff time. We did a lot of manual reporting and compiling and things like that. So we've been working on some recommendations, which I'll talk about a little later with regard to how we could streamline some of that reporting. And then finally, there are a number of internal DFA procedures that we're working on in order to respond more quickly and efficiently to emergency situations. These we're establishing, getting the delegations in place so that we can get those project approvals done quickly, looking at streamlining an application and creating a specific drought project application and some drought templates for agreements so that we can get those through the process more quickly. We're also working on some master agreements, as I mentioned, with some of our technical assistance providers. And that would function similar to the TA agreements that we have right now, where we could quickly assign projects to our nonprofit providers. And so we were looking, as I mentioned, at trying to augment some of those existing agreements so that we have them in place so we can respond more quickly for the emergency projects. Now I'm going to pass it over to Darren. He has a couple of slides that he's going to talk about. Next slide, please.
So the lessons I learned I wanted to bring to you today focus a little more externally than internally. There's a lot of little lessons we're incorporating internally, but what I wanted to talk about today was interaction with the water system. So before I jump into this, disclaimer, we have a full spectrum of water systems, those from very capable and do an outstanding job. And this isn't to disparage them in any way or disparage water systems broadly, but of course, what we're trying to focus on is those that have difficulties and problems. So the first one here that was very surprising to me, being new to drinking water, as I both was in DFA and then in this position in the Division of Drinking Water as we entered into the drought, was the fact that, or the number of water systems that on, and as Leslie would say, 4:30 on a Friday afternoon would call us up and say, I'm sucking air and I don't know why my well quit. And that just seemed to be phenomenally problematic. It damages equipment. It's something that can be avoided. And so a bit of information and push along that line seems to be appropriate. One of the things we can do here now that we couldn't do last time, and I'm putting this forward for board discussion at some point, is to basically issue technical orders to vulnerable systems to require them to report to us. We have a new authority that came in SB 200 under 116530 that we can ask for certain types of technical reports. And one of those I would recommend that we consider issuing is a technical report requirement for some sort of routine reporting of their water level basis, basically the head in their wells above their pumps, so that we can keep a track and predict who is, can have some emergency actions taken before equipment damage has happened and other things. This will likely impose costs on some water systems that don't have this. In the last drought, we bought handheld monitoring devices and sent our staff scurrying out to try to do some routine well level monitoring for systems and get a feel for what was going on. And that's certainly no way to do it this next time. So that would be a very big one. The next one to discuss is water systems waiting until they need to activate an alternative supply and coming to us and saying, I need a permit next week. That doesn't happen. That shouldn't be the way they operate. Again, many systems know that that isn't the case, but getting caught surprised and thinking that I had a supply and it's over there and I'll just need to throw some treatment on it and get it activated when the time comes is always a little bit too late. So working hard now and recognizing that we have some new challenges to water quality that we didn't have in the last drought, with 1,2,3 TCP and PFAS contamination being there. And appropriately, a lot of the systems have taken these wells offline and have reduced their capacity and may need to bring them back on. And therefore, we need to push hard to make sure that they're starting that process now before it becomes an issue for them and moving into that space. So
on that one, I just thank you, Darren. I think it's a really critical point, and of course, calls to mind the disaster in Flint when appropriate state oversight wasn't given of the switch of sources, and it isn't a small thing, and it has to be better prepared for, and it has to be done in a way that protects public health. And in an emergency, the push definitely comes to get it to us quick. But there's as always a balancing there. So I really appreciate you bringing that up.
Yeah, definitely. And it's something we proposed that we would prioritize our workload. Of course, we're always struggling to get all our work done, but we would make it a priority for systems that come to us that need to do those permitting actions and make sure that we try to address those in a very timely manner and make that a priority workload for us. And next slide, please. So also on level, this isn't as broadly as well levels, which are a little more hidden, but surprisingly also was a surprise to us in water systems at time, or maybe it wasn't a surprise to them, but it certainly was when they called us up because we weren't monitoring it. And that's basically the water level over reservoir intakes. We see our reservoirs at unprecedentedly low levels entering into this year at this moment in time. I would fully expect to see some of the intakes that water systems rely on to be dry and be, in needing to either switch over to other sources, which they may have or may not, or deal with emergency intakes. Some systems probably have emergency intake equipment that they had from the last drought and can reactivate that, but this is the time now to begin getting that ready, and also a time for us then to also make sure that we're working to make sure that they can permit that and move that ahead. Again, as a warning, I think many water systems appreciate this and have already taken steps, but waiting until the time to call up the pipe supplier and the pump manufacturer and the barge builder that you need this stuff isn't going to happen overnight. Construction equipment is all, and materials are all hard to come by at this point in time of our economy. And so I would say anybody that thinks they can do that would be a problem. And again, we think that there is some ability for us to monitor this and try to make sure that systems are taking an appropriate step way ahead of time and can be there. And this could be another part of a technical report requirement that we could analyze and bring forward and try to have a better understanding and make sure people are getting the right oversight on that. And then finally, here is another one. Unfortunately, as was mentioned, I think at the very beginning of our today, that letters have gone out from our water rights system, our water right division, about potential dry conditions and the potential of curtailment. In the last drought, there were 22 connection moratoriums that the Division of Drinking Water issued in conjunction with those curtailment orders that were issued in the previous drought. When we issued those, we put them in place in such a way that there was an expectation that they would develop an alternate supply before we removed the moratorium. We will, of course, see how well we did and how well those sources really pan out. Hopefully none of those 22 return and they've all taken appropriate action, but I would anticipate that we may need to move ahead and put that in. I would also just highlight that knowing that the housing pressures in California are extremely high and it's a very important topic, but building houses on top of a curtailed water system and a drought doesn't seem to be a wise decision. And so, sometimes we do need to act with those moratoriums. We did see systems last time not impose adequately water conservation measures or stop their connections during the drought in the last period. I would expect they'll be tempted to continue the flow as well going into this. And that's a very important topic for us to consider and to be upfront and early about what we're expecting to do. And so we are coordinating with the water rights staff. In fact, I saw meetings pop up on my computer earlier this morning, setting those up to make sure that we're coordinating and working in conjunction right with the water rights staff as the curtailment orders, if they do go out, that we're ready to follow through with connection moratoriums and make sure that we're able to implement those quickly and have water savings as a result. And next slide, I think, is back to Leslie.
Okay, yeah, we just have a couple slides on what we've been working on to make our information more readily available and improve our reporting. So we're working on some templates that could be used to generate the project information. I hope you can hear me. Darren looks frozen. Okay. So that we could use that information and report to the multiple sources. If we had our templates and everything available, then we can recommend formats and have it all ready to go as we begin needing to report on things. We plan to automate these and create web-based tools and reports for both our internal work and for the public information. And then, as Darren was talking about, we recommend that the water systems prepare and work with us early before they run out of water and it becomes an emergency. As Darren mentioned, I cannot tell you how many Friday afternoons we got calls because, systems thought they couldn't make it through the weekend because they've been having problems all week. And then it became an emergency and critical, and we had fewer options to respond to, and we had to really mobilize quickly to make sure that they didn't run out of water over the weekend. Next slide. So these are some of the reporting tools that we're using and developing through the SAFER program. And then we would, use similar types of reports that we plan to use for the drought. They're really great visualizations. We can display information on maps and have it linked to the funding information and things like that. So it'll all be available on our website, and we're hoping that'll streamline some of the reporting and the requests we get for information that take staff time away from working on the emergencies to working on compiling and responding to information requests. So next slide, that is all we have. And so Darren and I are happy to answer questions.
Thank you. Really appreciate it. And, just the good overview and thought given to ways that we can be, and specific suggestions on ways that we can be better prepared in this drought and in future droughts, as opposed to the last. It is, I think we've reflected on here, again, the Division of Drinking Water is still only, half a decade or so here at the water boards, but it's been incredible to see the work the growth, the evolution, the modernizing of our approaches to be far more data centric, far more about not just being better decision makers with the data that we're generating for ourselves, but instead turning that out to communities to support their decision making and ensure that collectively we can manage through things like drought. And so just thank you. I think I think one of the real key themes that I'm hearing here, and I think we touched on it before, is we're no longer waiting for systems to fail. And to Leslie and Darren's point, we're not that sometimes systems themselves may be a little disincentivized from reaching out, from notifying of issues until they're really too late to address. And we're trying to shift that and instead be far more active in our approach to assess and understand and predict and go to those communities with information, but also resources. And requests, of course, here around additional information or, again, at least reporting to us things that we as a state need to be aware of as we try to manage through crisis or manage through difficult circumstances here, again, drought being the specific thing we're talking about. So yeah, a common theme, and I appreciate that. And then again, the other common theme I'm seeing is around data, being better in our management of it, more refined in asking the right questions, and then importantly, turning that around to communities to collectively all be better decision makers in this space. And so just thank you, and know that this work will come very well timed in the months ahead for sure. And there again, the lessons of early engagement, better data, and modernizing our approaches are going to be pretty key. So just thank you for that leadership and continued leadership. Fellow board colleagues, I know we do have a few public commenters here. We have about 3, and then, but please welcome everyone else's thoughts, questions, and direction.
I just have one question and follow up on the moratorium and curtailment issue, Mr. Polhemus. So I know that there are statutes on the books right now regarding water supply availability for new housing developments, but I think that it's pretty large. I'm not quite sure what the number is of housing units. So just want to have a little bit more of a conversation on this issue. You mentioned that, in several of these systems, the moratorium remained in place for several years, but just looking for an opportunity here for better preparedness with communities. If you don't have to check the box unless you have, unless a local government is approving a permit for a large subdivision, then what other tools, of course the tools are there, but what else can we do to help remind communities of just the severe challenge that could be presented to communities with a curtailment notice?
Yeah, for sure. I don't remember it exactly either. I want to say it's like, housing developments of 50 houses or more, the ones that you're thinking of where there's a requirement to, verify that there's water available to serve that new development. Most of our small communities aren't talking about adding that number of connections, but they are adding a dozen here and a dozen there as they go along. I think we also see some unprecedented new moves with, the post-pandemic environment where many people have moved out into, out of the urban centers and into some rural communities. So there's, housing pressure created there. And we do see that, that just goes unnoticed. And, I'm overstating it, but I think, in California for a long time, just, everybody figured out that, we would find the water after we built the house. And it was always there before. And so it seems like it would be there in the future. And I think we have run up to a reality between climate change and our population size and the use of our water resources that certainly it doesn't apply broadly. And it does raise some really interesting land use questions that we need to, as a whole, California, start to address at local level and county level and our planning associated with that. It's a bit hard for us to get at that, and we're definitely late to the game when extremes being curtailed. And now we're saying you got to stop, building as at least as a first step. Most of the systems that did struggle through that, it took all of them some time to identify alternate water sources. We wanted to try to vet them and make sure that they were real claims, not some promise, drill another well someday or modify. Some of them stayed in position for quite some time. Some of them became political, where the local representatives fought us pretty hard about what was going on and the fact that we were keeping the moratoriums in place, which I think only goes to the development pressure, of course, that is a history in California. But I think ultimately we tried to make fair and honest decisions about whether they were at that. I don't know if all those sources have been developed. Some of them were probably in a planning stage and being implemented hopefully now, and so that we see that moving forward. But it is a troubling question and something we do need to get a little deeper into. With some of the other tools we talked about today, the drought map and other things, and have better conversations with our local land use agencies about what they're thinking and where they're headed.
Yeah, I think that'd be helpful, just even conversations, flagging things that, are obvious to us, but, because agencies have a lot on their plate, land use agencies. So just would like to have some ongoing conversations about this.
Yeah, I think there's another thing, if I could just kind of tail on that a little bit, it's a corollary to this that was a bit frustrating for us as well. Many counties treat the drilling of new wells as just an administrative process, and they don't really evaluate what the impacts would be on surrounding water sources or anything. Leslie and I at times would bite our tongues really hard when it came to knowing that some big wells were going in next to the new well we just drilled for a community and wondering how long that supply might last. And so hopefully under Sigma, there's much broader effort around planning of quality of the sources and the supplies, and that we don't quite see some of the egregious actions we saw back then. So that is in place as well, that should hopefully help bring this discussion forward.
Great. And then I just want to take this opportunity. I don't plan on commenting again, but just really want to thank both of you, Ms. Loudon and Mr. Polhemus, for your amazing work. And today's agenda, it's just really helpful to be able to look at all of these issues at once. So thank you, Chair Esquivel and Ms. Sobek and the executive team for, thinking through today's agenda. And, sometimes when we receive informational items kind of one-off, it's hard to look at it all in terms of the bigger picture. And this is just really useful today. I think that it's helpful for the public to hear and for us to see how far we have come, you all have come in our work over the past few years, and develop a vision going forward. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, board member, and for being part of that vision. I know the last drought was difficult. This board was dealing with many new things for the first time. Hopefully, I definitely see and know that we're slowly getting, I don't want to overpromise for sure. These are difficult challenges, but there is incredible progress and leadership, and very thankful for that, especially as we enter in a time which will test how well we've learned our lessons. So, and just thank you, Vice Chair, for your leadership in all that time, and Board Member Dodek as well, knowing that the three of us here then otherwise weren't in the teeth of the drought. I came in 2017 in a very nice wet year. So know that here, as we find ourselves with drought conditions, again, this is all going to come well served. Thank you for that, Vice Chair. Any other comments before we go to the three commenters we have here? Board Member Dodek.
To that really quickly, essentially wrapping up my comments on today, I definitely concur. This has just been really excellent in terms of the information that's provided, but also helping us to see that big pictures. And having lived through the last drought, the only thing I will say is it looks like, and I hope that's the case, we have learned from our experience then and are approaching things in a different way, hopefully a more effective, efficient, collaborative, and ultimately resulting in better outcomes. So I don't think any of us want to have, but having that experience in our back pocket, having Mr. Bohemus, Ms. Loudon, all the other staff, and I think it helps us and it helps our stakeholders to be in a much better position to deal with what's coming down, this summer and next summer potentially. So thank you, everybody, and we'll tackle it.
Hear, hear. Thank you, board member. We'll go to our commenters, and I'd like to call up Eric Oriana.
Thank you, board member. I really wanted to just make a few comments here on drought, but wanted to really appreciate the board prioritizing drought and the impacts to California's drinking water. The lessons learned outlined by Ms. London and Mr. Polimas are reassuring, and they really give us a sense that we will avoid some of the mistakes of the past. And really, we understand that board members have many tough decisions to make regarding drought. But for many community residents, drought means an avoidable interruption to communities' drinking water. And during the last drought, thousands of community households experienced dry wells and long periods without access to running drinking water in their homes. As the effects of climate change exacerbate drought impacts and increase the frequency of dry conditions, it's important that California prioritize communities most vulnerable to drought communities. And in order to help the state prioritize the most vulnerable communities, CWC and other NGO partners want to work with the board so that we can have more proactive drought response this time around ahead of the next drought. And we urge the State Water Board to work in partnership with other key state agencies to prepare and publicly release, by this summer, a proactive drought preparedness and response plan. This is one recommendation that we've outlined in a letter that we shared with board members ahead of this meeting. This letter is jointly written by environmental justice and technical assistance organizations. And we hope that that letter has some important recommendations and helpful recommendations for the board. We also shared a drought lessons learned document that we developed as Community Water Center in the immediate aftermath of the last drought. And again, the main takeaway from that lessons learned document was that we need to proactively prepare now before the next drought emergency hits. And then also, as in part of our work, we're calling also on the legislature and the governor to invest in basic drought resiliency infrastructure. The release of the DWR and State Water Board drought report, as well as the State Water Board's needs assessment report, will help inform these necessary drought resiliency infrastructures for our most vulnerable communities. Really wanted to end with this last point that historically the state has often prioritized agricultural interests ahead of rural communities of color interests, but we're confident that this State Water Board has the knowledge and ability to ensure that communities of color are prioritized in the face of a mega drought, and we look forward to continually working with stakeholders to ensure rural communities are protected from drought impacts. Thank you, really appreciate the opportunity.
Thank you as well, Mr. Oriana, and for your continued great cogent comments throughout our items today. Really appreciate your engagement today in today's discussion and longstanding engagement of the Community Water Center around these issues. So thank you. Next, we have Michael Claiborne.
Thank you, Chair Esquivel.
Good to see you.
Leadership Council for Justice and Accountability. Apologies in advance. I wrote way too much on this item, but I'll try to get through it. So I think this is a very timely conversation as we head back into drought in this state, and as it becomes ever more clear that we must adapt to more frequent and severe droughts as the new normal. We learned a lot during the last drought. We also have additional tools, including SB 200 and SAFER, the CDAG report, the needs assessment, including the risk assessment, in particular, SB 88 Mandatory Consolidation Authority, and I think maybe most importantly, SGMA. We'll need a coordinated response that includes the board, DWR, OES, USDA, local jurisdictions, technical assistance providers, and impacted communities using each of these tools effectively to weather this drought. We have an opportunity to proactively protect drinking water access and avoid the next East Porterville, but we need to move quickly and prepare quickly. It's going to take emergency response, including tanks and bottled water, also assistance for low-income households that need to drill deeper wells, as well as technical assistance and funding to small at-risk water systems. And we need to plan and quickly implement consolidation and extension of service projects where water systems and wells are impacted by drought or are at risk of losing access to groundwater. And I think the needs assessment is going to be such a critical tool for proactive response here. With respect to SGMA, it's only as strong as we know as the local GSPs. And unfortunately, we've seen that these GSPs are just not very good, certainly not in the San Joaquin Valley. Urban water conservation is going to be important, but 80% of the water in the state is used by agriculture. And if we don't see significant reductions in use by agriculture, we will see dry drinking water wells. It's really that simple. Here are some facts from the last drought. There was a 30% statewide reduction in surface water available to agriculture. 2/3 of that reduction was replaced just by additional groundwater pumping. About 1/3 was replaced by demand reduction through activities like efficiency improvements, crop selection, stress irrigation, and fallowing. The rest was additional groundwater pumping. Tree crop acreage like almonds went up during the last drought, paradoxically. And because of subsidence, a lot of this overdraft resulted in permanent loss of groundwater storage. And then also as a result, the impact we're most worried about is that thousands of domestic wells went dry during the last drought, impacting around 12,000 Californians. The state board and DWR must provide a strong regulatory backstop to quickly ensure improvements to the GSPs and protect access to drinking water. And I'd note that it's our opinion that this really isn't a scarcity issue. Even during drought, there's enough water for domestic supply and agriculture if it's used wisely and sustainably. As has also been noted during this presentation, oversight of local permitting of new well drilling and formation of new water system is going to be really important. And I'd also acknowledge and thank Board Member Firestone for noting the disproportionate impacts of the last drought on communities of color, particularly with respect to Latino communities in the San Joaquin Valley. Effective drought response is an environmental and a racial justice issue. And then my final point is that engaging impacted communities and at-risk communities themselves in decision-making and planning will be critical to an inclusive and effective response. And we look forward to working with the board and staff and other stakeholders in drought response and coordination. Appreciate it.
Appreciate your comments, Mr. Claiborne, and your continued engagement on these issues. Thank you. Really appreciate it. And then last, we have Crystal Gonzalez. Hello.
Hello, can you hear me? Yeah, sorry.
We can.
Yeah, thank you. I don't have much additional to add than what Eric and Michael have already provided. Yeah, definitely thank you so much for providing the space to and having these informational items to really understand the comprehensive issue of water access and quality and how that intersects with drought and the needs of communities and climate change. So thank you so much for your time and for all the work that's been done. And we look forward to continue working in collaboration.
Thank you, Ms. Gonzalez, for your time and your engagement today in our items and the discussion. Really, really appreciate it. It's really enriched our back and forth and conversation. So thank you. And okay, well, that brings us to the end of public comment on the item. But are there any other thoughts that have been spurred or questions and otherwise direction that board members want to provide?
Yeah, I'll add some. So I guess, first of all, you know, the state board in the last drought was really, I think, one of the most effective assistance providers and partners in the response to the drought. I think just so appreciate the work and kind of understanding of how to support solutions in these at-risk communities. So want to just first start by acknowledging that. And I think you can see certainly from just all the reflections here that you presented on lessons learned and what we're already getting in place and doing in preparation, I think is just a reflection of how much I think the expertise really and priorities of board and staff are focused on this. Also, just, you know, one thing that also sometimes goes unsaid is that in addition to certainly the priority of ensuring that we don't have households that lack water and this public health crisis, that there's also just a huge cost savings for the state. The state can't afford to do what we had to do in East Porterville. The costs of that are really exorbitant. And so, you know, I think certainly we have the call of the human right to water and public health and, you know, the overall mission we have at the Water Board, but also just as a state in terms of stewardship of taxpayer dollars and resources and the ability of our state to respond. It's really vital that we get ahead of this. You know, I would just say I strongly support the use of the technical report orders to try to make sure that for targeted areas, so you're not something that we have to do statewide, but where we do have this much more detailed understanding of where there's water supply and drought risk, where there's these vulnerable communities, where there's really vulnerable state smalls and private wells. You know, as using the tools that we have is vital to be able to get ahead of this and frankly enable partners to get ahead of this on the ground. So I think the kinds of orders, not just about asking for systems to be able to measure their well levels, which seems you know, basic. But, you know, also these questions about what is the, around backup sources. So I think we saw too many systems, for example, that didn't have, that relied on some kind of backup source or alternative water source that they had to turn on that didn't meet primary drinking water standards. And at this point, you know, there's no excuse for not working on that ahead of time. I think there's a lot that needs to be done. We are a partner in that, and we need to use the tools that we have. So I just strongly support, you know, Darren, your leadership in making the judgment calls about how to ensure we're getting the information we need, ensure that there's technical preparation going on, and really, you know, ensuring that there's the kind of planning and management in place so that we don't have more East Portervilles, so that we don't have more families that don't have safe water to drink or water at all to drink. So again, so impressed always with the work and foresight of staff. I think really look forward to partnering more in how we can be proactive in coordinating with not just our systems, but local agencies, counties, GSAs, and service providers to make sure that that we can go into this with the most preparation and preparedness that we can.
Thank you, Board Member. Mr. Wilhelmus, response.
I can add to that, Ms. Firestone, that what we are just now beginning to try to figure out who the order should go to. We definitely are not contemplating a blanket order. It needs to be targeted. It needs to be focused. And I don't unfortunately have those for you yet. We've just begun that work. We'll have it soon and be able to report back on how we are looking at it and what we think, and of course want feedback on whether we're hitting all the right spots. But that's underway and more to come as we look into that. And good point on just a simple question. I hadn't thought of that one, but it was kind of buried in my other one of needing the permit. We can ask them ahead of time of what their alternate sources are and be clear that they should let us know if it is one, and we can have a technical order on that one. So we'll proceed.
Thank you. Thank you both. Yeah, I feel it's really because drought is so slow moving and in many ways predictable. It is about the preparation beforehand and those resources that go into that preparation. It's trying to weather longer, drier periods, which we know we'll be encountering with climate change. And so, how can we ensure that our communities can last, 3, 4, 5 years of drought, which may not be, is not unheard of, certainly in the geologic record. And we're certainly seeing maybe the case of extended drought. And so how do we push past that emergency point a little sometimes is definitely the key here. So.
And Chair Scoville, if I could add one more thing, it just occurs to me, it may not be appreciated broadly throughout the public that of how many small water systems are currently single source, literally one well, which we of course do not permit anymore, but they're grandfathered in. So a new system couldn't be formed that way. However, they still remain, they're still relying on that old well. And that's probably one of my biggest worries. Any water system listening to me now that has one well and is entering into this new period, you really, really need to begin thinking about how to add additional sources, whether that's an intertie to someone nearby or some other component. To kind of make light of it, but hopefully so it sticks. My kids always come to me with like, here my computer was working 2 minutes ago, but now it's broke. And we have this fallacy that because something's worked for so long that it's going to keep working. Well, guess what? Everything that broke was working right before it did break. And over and over again, as a trained engineer, I try to drive that home you got to expect that to break. It will break. It's guaranteed to break. And it will come probably at the worst time if you are an advocate of Murphy's Law. So the quicker we can get people started on that, the more important it is.
You're here. Thank you. Board Member McGuire, just want to make sure I provide you opportunity here, I think, but otherwise, yeah.
Thank you. Sorry, I apologize. I lost my internet for a while there. So I missed some of the discussion. But I just want to thank everyone for the really thoughtful input and preparation for the unknown of what's to come. It can be overwhelming sometimes to think, about just how much, could happen here. And yet, just hearing back, kind of the lessons learned from the last drought, and that we do still have some financial assistance tools still even available now, was a little bit comforting to me, actually, to know that we still have some resources here, because I just fear that sooner rather than later, we'll start to hear from folks who are running into some of these water supply challenges that we're so concerned about. So, just getting back to the communication and outreach, we heard this morning about the CDAG report and some of the resilience measures that are included in there. And I think that speaks a lot to what Mr. Bohemus just talked about in terms of having more than one source, having adequate storage, and, a number of other recommendations that are there. So I think there's a lot to be said for getting the word out on all of that. And, even if folks sort of intrinsically know, they should know better. I think maybe hearing from us whether, at this point, maybe just from a communication perspective that, these are some new recommendations out from the Water Board that all water systems should be thinking about. If you're not already, we're in a drought, this is the time, could be quite effective. And then also focusing in, meanwhile, on some of those other systems that are in fact in higher risk and of higher concern and more immediate concern, I would support, going out and getting the type, whether it's water level information or other information that will help, help us be more proactive and ready and understand what the extent of the challenges are, and also help them at the same time if they need assistance with collecting that type of data. So thank you everyone who's been involved, and thank you to the stakeholders for your thoughtful comments today. I really appreciate this conversation, and definitely look forward to some updates soon on this as we move forward here. Thanks.
Thank you, board member. And yeah, just again, thank you, Mr. Polhamus. Thank you, Ms. Loudon here for just the great work. And we look forward to what I know will be a lot further discussion in the time ahead. There's certainly a lot of need. So thank you. All right, well, that concludes item number 7, and it brings us to the tail end here of our agenda with board member reports, and then a quick touch point on executive director's report. I actually haven't, I think, had any. I've looked back through public engagements in the last 2 weeks. There's certainly been a lot of work, but so nothing to report on other than just reminding folks that it is dry out there. Conservation is important. And we're going to be needing to continue all to transition into drought management and make sure that we are engaging and communicating and helping one another manage through what are obvious dry conditions here. And knowing that each drought, again, presents itself a bit differently with regional differences of intensity and need. And so just, thank everyone for what will be continued work, obviously, in this space. And thankful for everyone's time today on a very drinking water focused discussion, which comes well timed and well needed. But otherwise, no further report from me. But I open up to my other fellow board colleagues for any reports they may have.
I just have a report with respect to regional board liaison reports. So I attended or followed as much as I could Region 3's deliberations on the update of their ag order 4.0. They had 2 full days of very robust discussion and adopted an order on the evening of the 15th. And then the following day, they continued with their regular course of business, and I provided an update to Region 3, and the day before, an update to Region 1. I kind of stole board member McGuire's idea. For both regional boards, I provided a brief PowerPoint on the update of our strategic plan. And there was a lot of interest in that. And so we had a good discussion, and I know that the regional boards are looking at updates of their own. So thank you, board member McGuire, for that idea. And then I would say for Region 3, as expected, I tried to keep the report short because I did do that PowerPoint. And asked what their interest was for future reports. And Region 3, of course, is very much interested in safe drinking water. And I told them of today's discussion and that I would follow up on some of their specific questions. And then for Region 1, of course, drought. They're very much in the thick of many of these issues that we've been talking about, in particular, Russian River, Scott, and they are very much interested in following our activities and in coordinating and collaborating with us wherever possible.
Thank you, Vice Chair. Really appreciate that, and really glad the strategic plan continues to be a good document that's really useful to us, not kind of sitting on a shelf, but really informing our work and engagement. So thank you, Board Member McGuire and Vice Chair for doing that. Other reports?
I don't have too much to report. I would like to highlight that on Friday, I was able to listen to the staff the Division of Water Rights discussion on the water supply demand visualization tool, and also their discussion of data processing techniques in the afternoon, water demand data. And just, you know, today we're focused on drinking water and predominantly, but there's also a whole host of data and information and thought that's being put to watershed management. And I just really appreciate that work. And I know that there's a long way to go. There's a lot of moving parts on that right now, but I was really encouraged to see staff taking the initiative to start to develop these tools, to look at the watershed scale, to look at that, you know, based on just information that we have, you know, what is the surface water demand that's out there? What is the supply in any given watershed, so that we can, and to some extent, crowdsource and crowd correct and just better understand what we're dealing with. You know, we hear a lot about the watersheds that are struggling most, like the Russian River currently and some others. And so I know this tool has, you know, a ways to go. There's some, you know, development steps that are forthcoming, but nonetheless, it's great to get it out there in the public domain, to let folks start to work with the information. And I'm just, you know, really excited to see where that goes over time. So just wanted to highlight that if you didn't get a chance to watch it.
Really appreciate you highlighting that. I didn't, unfortunately, get to attend, but I'd heard that we bordered on 300 participants at that discussion, which is fantastic. Because to your point, board member, the crowdsourcing that we need to go on continuously in this whole information side, data side, particularly with water rights, the buy-in, the attention is really critical. This isn't, you know, the water rights system is not for the board alone to administer, although it's in our purview, but it's an asset of the state at large, which means that all the water rights holders should feel ownership to what is ultimately our decision-making collectively in it, and maybe a little shame for, you know, what we have highlighted already as a lack of compliance on some of the diversion reports that are just so critical and basic to a water rights administration. So thank you, board member. I really, really appreciate that. And then my opportunity to riff on it a little. Other colleagues with reports? And if none, you just.
Oh, I was just waiting for. Tam, you want to go first?
Sure. Just two quick things. I had a meeting with Ms. Tara Missing of the Environmental Defense Center regarding the Cat Canyon aquifer exemption issue. And, you know, I'm sure you've all seen the emails from her as well. The one thing I just wanted to note, which came as a surprise to me, I don't know if Mr. Bishop is still around, but she said she never received a response to her request that the board conduct a hearing on this matter. And I thought that staff did respond. It could have been via email or something, but I thought that response was sent. So if you could please follow up and make sure that is the case. I hate leaving things unresponded to.
So
go ahead.
I have responded to her many times. I talk to her every week. I will check to see if we sent a formal response. We may not have sent a formal response, and I will follow up and do a formal response.
Since it was a formal request for a hearing. Thank you, Mr. Bishop. And then the other thing that I'll give you all a heads up on too also is I had a meeting, as I'm sure some of you did as well, with Sean Bothwell and the California Coastkeeper Alliance. And amongst the things that we discussed was the trash TMDL. I mentioned to him my interest in at least looking at it with the issue of homeless and trash coming from homeless encampments, and see if there's a potential for, you know, some synergy there. And he pointed out that when we adopted the trash TMDL in the resolution, we also committed to following up on hotspots throughout the states. And, you know, obviously hotspots and homeless encampments, there is some synergy there as well. So a heads up to Mr. Bishop that I'll want to touch base with staff on that issue as well. Thank you.
Thank you so much, board member. Board member Firestone.
Yeah. Okay. I did have some speaking stuff, but I you know, I talked a bit about on a panel on the affordability issues that we've seen with household debt and around consolidations, and also was able to steal the slides, an idea from Board Member McGuire to present the overview of the strategic planning work plan with the Region 9 and Region 7. I also would, and sort of asked if staff already had it available, but want to help make sure that we can provide the regional boards a little bit more region-specific views into the needs assessment results in their region. To follow up, I think, was it Yatam that mentioned Region 5 is really interested in that. So, you know, our staff have so much on their plate, but to the extent that's easy to do, that's something I want to try to make sure I can provide to Region 7 and 9. And so would also be happy to help support that for other regions if that's helpful. I think a lot of times the regional boards are really interested in the drinking water challenges in their own region, and some are more directly engaged than others. But I think that to the extent that's possible, I think that's helpful. I guess two things particularly on my mind these days continues to be how we're hopefully soon getting some of the federal relief money for household debt. Still waiting on the feds, but looking at a program here at the state level, again through CSD, and hopeful. I heard a rumor that might be, we may have some more hopefully in May. And CV salts, I just wanted to mention that all of the management zones in that tier 1 or priority 1, I forget which term was used, submitted their early action plans for drinking water, providing drinking water and well testing in their regions around nitrate, and they need to start providing those services. I think it's by May 7th in each of those regions, and it's in a process of review and feedback by the regional board. And I know our staff have been doing a lot of work to try and coordinate closely with the management zones on coordination with the SAFER program, especially around private well testing, so that we can make sure that households not only get information on nitrate where that's high risk, but can partner with the funding we have for testing on those other contaminants that we know are high risk in their area where they have them. So I think it's both cost savings and just a safety need with households to be able to understand whether their water is safe. With that, definitely drought on my mind. I really appreciate all the everything that was discussed today, and the time to do that, and the time that has, more importantly, going into to the work ahead and the preparedness for what we face. That's it.
Thank you so much, Board Member Director Sobek, Executive Director Sobek. Good to see you. Good afternoon.
Thank you. Good afternoon, board members. I don't have anything to add to my report unless you have questions, but what I did want to say is starting from today's baseline in the DFA and Division of Drinking Water world and moving forward, I think we're gonna sit down and think through how to get information to you board members on a regular basis, how to get information to the public on a regular basis, and how to communicate to you board members and the public what our public outreach efforts are. And I want to do, some of it will be, periodic info items or standing info items to the board. Some of them will be included in the executive director's report. Some of them might be staff reports to you all directly. As conditions have, we didn't know until recently how bad things would be. We now know although looks like there might be a storm in parts of the state later this week, that basically the precipitation season is over. So I know that one of the things that happens as conditions escalate and get worse, and there are specific places where we need to put a lot of attention, is that the amount of meeting and coordination time just kind of can really eat into the time to do productive work. And so I do want to make sure that everybody gets the information that they need on a real-time basis, but also try to minimize just an endless cycle of meetings and briefings. So, I mean, I will appreciate your input into whether we're doing enough or too much, and how we can do that efficiently and effectively, and preserve as much staff time as possible to actually get relief, engage in the kind of outward facing communication and identification and solution of problems that that we've talked about and that you all have directed us to prioritize and spend time on today. But we will be more affirmatively presenting that information to you going forward.
Thank you, Ms. Sobek. I really appreciate that. Knowing and here looking again to Vice Chair Diadamo and Board Member Dodek, in the last drought, it was a lot to be processing at once. There was a lot of movement and big decisions before the board, and so yeah, just part of the lesson is just getting even better, I think, on the communication both internally for us, but certainly for the public as well around all that work. And so, thank you. I don't have any questions for the executive director's report, and just appreciate that. But Board Member Firestone.
Oh, just following up on that, I think definitely, defer to you, Executive Director Sobek, on what is the best way. But I definitely would love, some kind of standing item like we had with COVID on just drought updates. If there isn't anything new at a board meeting, then like we had with COVID, that's fine. But there's so much moving parts, and so would love that. And then, what goes in that versus executive officer's report or something else, defer to you, of course, but I think that would be great. And I think, a lot of times we have these regular updates on hydrologic conditions and urban water conservation, and be great to figure out how to add something around the drinking water, and maybe even something within something appropriate within the water rights context as well, just as being able to sort of track these quickly. Well, this slow, as Board Member McGuire said, in some ways it's a slow moving problem, but there's so much happening quickly on the ground.
Right. We're going to want to look at all those things and figure out like what's the right interval, what kind of tracking, what's out there. Make sure that you guys know, like the hydrological updates. A lot of that you guys can see whenever you want in real time, but still bring it to everybody's attention at the appropriate interval is helpful. So those are all the things that we're thinking about, and we'll try to figure out and let you know kind of what our plans are. But yeah, I agree that having a standing item and figuring out sort of what things, how often to include in it will be part of that process.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you. Thank you both. So that concludes our items, I think, for today, but it leaves one really big item for tomorrow still, and that's our workshop on the Sacramento River temperature management challenges that we see this year. There will be a hydrologic update as part of that to kind of frame the discussion, and just want to just thank and acknowledge Department of Water Resources and the Bureau of Reclamation, particularly, of course, and our other federal partners like the National Marine Fisheries Services and others that will be there tomorrow to present and provide some of the decision making and discussion that's been going on, and really be able to allow us to have a conversation on the complicated challenges we certainly find on the system generally, but then particularly here in dry years when it is hard to meet the very many competing demands of the State Water Project and the Central Valley Project. So we'll all gather tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock for that item. But for today, We're in recess then, and just thank everyone for just the great discussion today, a focused discussion on drinking water and drought. And tomorrow we'll explore our temperature challenges on the Sacramento River. All right. Thank you, everyone. We'll see you tomorrow.